Part 1: The Fires of Samhain, the Celtic dawn of Halloween. Long before pumpkins glowed on porches, long before masks and candy filled the twilight streets, there was a festival of fire and shadow held under the cold, watching stars of the ancient Celtic world. It was called Samhain, pronounced Samhain, and it marked the turning of the year, the boundary between the bright half and the dark, between life's warmth and the long breath of winter. In those ancient centuries, before written records softened memory into parchment, the Celtic peoples of Ireland, Scotland, and parts of Gaul lived by the rhythm of the earth. Their year was a circle of light and dark, and Samhain stood at its edge, the time when harvest was done, the animals brought down from pasture, and the spirits of the dead were believed to walk once more among the living. The people of those mist-clad lands did not fear this night so much as they respected it. It was a night of thresholds, when the walls between worlds grew thin. The Celts lived close to the pulse of nature. They saw divinity in the turning of seasons, in the whisper of trees, in the flicker of flame and the pull of moonlight on tide. The Druids, their learned class, keepers of law and ritual, taught that time itself was not a straight road but a wheel. Samhain, which fell around what we now call the end of October, was the spoke where endings touched beginnings. It was both a farewell and a welcome, farewell to summer's bounty, welcome to winter's rest. As dusk fell on Samhain Eve, the hearth fires in every home were extinguished, plunging villages into darkness. On the hilltops, great bonfires were kindled, sacred flames lit by druid hands. The people gathered there in cloaks against the chill, bringing offerings of grain, milk, or bread. Some brought tokens for the spirits of ancestors, hoping for protection in the months ahead. The fire was more than light, it was purification. From it, new flames would be carried back to rekindle every hearth, symbolizing renewal and unity for the coming year. The Celts believed that on this night, time loosened its boundaries. The living and the dead could touch. The Side, or fair folk, the mysterious beings who dwelled in mounds and mist, were said to roam freely, neither benevolent nor cruel, simply beyond the reach of human understanding. Doors were left ajar, offerings set by thresholds, candles lit to guide lost souls. It was said that one must not mock the unseen on Samhain, for to do so invited mischief that could linger all winter long. There was magic in the air that night, the kind born not of fear, but of awe. Farmers read the signs in smoke and wind, trying to glimpse what the next year would bring. Young men and women performed divinations by the light of the fire, dropping hazelnuts into the coals to see whose names would crack and whose would endure, signs of love or loss, marriage or misfortune. The spirits of ancestors were honored with feasts, their places set at the table, their presence invoked with quiet remembrance. In these traditions, we see the earliest roots of what would one day become Halloween. The costumes of modern trick-or-treaters echo the disguises once worn to confuse wandering spirits, the carved faces of pumpkins descend from lanterns made of turnips, hollowed out to ward off evil. Even the games and sweets have their origins in those old harvest feasts, when the living celebrated not just plenty, but survival, the miracle of having endured another cycle of sun and storm. But Samhain was never purely joyful. It was solemn too, because it confronted the truth that every harvest must end, that every light must fade. In the Celtic imagination, death was not the enemy of life, but its necessary partner. To honor the dead was to honor life itself, to remember that both were part of the same sacred circle. The veil between worlds was thin, yes, but it was not meant to terrify. It was meant to remind. The Druids spoke of the other world, a place both near and far, where spirits lived in an eternal twilight of peace and abundance. On Samhain night, the border between that world and this one softened. The living might catch whispers of their ancestors in the wind, or sense unseen presences moving gently among them. It was said that heroes of old could sometimes pass through that veil entirely, walking among gods or spirits before returning with wisdom or madness. To the Celts, these stories were not superstition. They were truth expressed in symbol. The cycle of seasons mirrored the cycle of the soul, birth, growth, decline, renewal. Just as fields rested in winter to rise again in spring, so too did life yield to death and rise again in new form. Samhain was their way of participating in that mystery. Imagine it now, the chill night air heavy with the scent of peat and smoke, the soft hiss of rain on heather, the murmur of voices around the great hillfire. children clutching their mothers' cloaks, elders staring into the embers as if reading the future. The flames cast long shadows on the earth, shadows that seemed to move on their own. In the distance, the cattle lowed, the last harvest wagons creaked home, and the stars burned cold and clear over the ancient land. This was the true beginning of what would one day be Halloween, not a night of fright, but of reverence. A night that taught the living to look into the darkness without despair, to see in death not an end, but a pause. For them, the year began not in spring, but in the stillness after the harvest, when the world seemed to sleep and dream. The fires of Samhain burned for thousands of years. They flickered through the rise of Rome, through conversion and conquest, through centuries when old gods were renamed and old rituals reshaped. But the flame never went out entirely. It hid in customs, in children's games, in the laughter that accompanies fear. It became the lantern in the window, the candle in the pumpkin, the thrill that runs through the body when night falls and the wind whispers of things unseen. And so, from the Celtic hills of fire and mist, the long story of Halloween began, not as a holiday of terror, but as a hymn to the eternal turning of light and dark. In the next part, we will travel forward in time, as the Roman world absorbs and transforms these ancient traditions, weaving them into new patterns of festival, faith, and memory. But for now, let the fire burn low. Listen to the wind outside your window. The year is turning. The old world still breathes, softly, beneath the modern one. And the spirits of Samhain, patient and watchful, still wander beneath the stars. Part 2, The Roman Touch, Festivals of the Dead. The story of Halloween, like so much of human history, is a tale of blending, of old fires and new gods, of traditions reshaped rather than erased. When the might of Rome reached the misty lands of the Celts, the two worlds collided not only in battle, but in belief. The Roman Empire, vast and many-faced, had its own ways of honoring the passing of seasons and the spirits of the dead. Over time, these observances began to intertwine with Samhain, forming new customs that would carry through centuries of change. By the 1st century BCE, Rome was a civilization of immense confidence, its roads and legions stretching across Europe. Yet even within its marble temples and disciplined armies, there was a deep awareness of mortality. The Romans, like the Celts, believed the living and the dead shared a delicate connection, and they marked that bond through festivals meant to remember, to appease, and to celebrate. Two such observances became crucial in shaping the future Halloween, Feralia and Pomona. Feralia was part of the Parentalia, a series of Roman festivals held each February to honor deceased ancestors. It was a time of somber reflection, when families would visit the tombs of their forebears, leaving offerings of wine, garlands, and grain. There was no fear in these rites, only duty and devotion. The Romans believed that neglecting the dead could invite unrest among their spirits, while remembrance kept them peaceful and protective. When Roman soldiers and settlers came to the Celtic lands, they brought these customs with them. They found that the Celts, too, held an annual festival for the dead, but theirs fell not in February, but at the threshold of winter, when the harvest was in and the year was ending. The Romans, pragmatic in faith as in governance, did not suppress such traditions outright. Instead, they allowed, and even encouraged, their integration into Roman life. Samhain's fires and Feralia's solemn offerings began to mingle. The pagan and the imperial shared a table of memory. The second Roman festival, Pomona, added a lighter note. Pomona was the goddess of fruit, orchards, and plenty, and her feast celebrated the abundance of autumn. She was often depicted holding apples, symbols of fertility and wisdom. When her festival merged with the Celtic Samhain, the apple became an emblem of the season, a detail that would echo centuries later in the bobbing games of Halloween night. Imagine the blending of these worlds, the disciplined rituals of the Roman legions meeting the wild fires of Celtic Samhain, soldiers exchanging garlands and apples with villagers gathered around sacred flames. Latin prayers murmured alongside druidic chants. The smoke of offerings curled together into the same sky. It was a meeting not of conquest, but of continuity, a recognition that beneath the banners and borders, all people sought to honor the same mysteries, life, death, and the space between. As Roman influence deepened, so too did this cultural fusion. Roads built for empire became paths for ideas. festivals once confined to villages spread across provinces, adapting to local customs as they went. In Gaul and Britannia, Samhain's ancient fires burned beside Roman lamps, and the Night of Remembrance began to acquire new meanings. Yet even as Rome expanded, its own religion was changing. The old pantheon of Jupiter, Venus, and Mars began to yield to a rising new faith, Christianity. And when that faith at last took root in the imperial heart, it carried with it an ambition not only to convert souls, but to reshape time itself. By the 4th century CE, Christianity had become the dominant religion of the empire. Pagan festivals, once tolerated, were gradually transformed into Christian observances. The Church, recognizing the deep hold these celebrations had on people's hearts, often chose to sanctify rather than suppress them. Samhain and its Roman echoes would be no exception. The process was slow, almost organic. Christian missionaries who arrived in the Celtic lands found that the locals' reverence for the dead and belief in unseen spirits could be redirected rather than destroyed. The Church introduced All Saints' Day, a holy day to honor the saints and martyrs, first celebrated on May 13th and later moved to November 1st, directly atop Samhain. The evening before, known as All Hallows' Eve, would one day bear a name that echoes down to us as Halloween. But before that synthesis was complete, centuries of quiet blending continued. The bonfires persisted, now sometimes blessed by priests. Offerings to the dead were reframed as prayers for souls in purgatory. The spirits of the side became, in Christian retelling, angels or demons, depending on who spoke. Yet through all these transformations, the heart of the tradition remained, the sense that at certain times of year, the boundaries between life and death grow thin, and memory becomes a sacred duty. Archaeologists have found evidence of both Roman and Celtic elements coexisting in burial sites and artifacts of this era, Roman pottery alongside Celtic symbols, Christian crosses carved near ancient mounds. These findings tell a story of continuity rather than collapse. The world was changing, yes, but it was carrying its past with it, as people always do. The fires of Samhain still flickered beneath new rituals. The feasts for Pomona still filled tables with apples, nuts, and honey. The prayers for the dead still rose into the crisp autumn air. And though centuries of empire, conquest, and conversion would reshape the world again and again, the season itself, the deep rhythm of harvest and darkness, remained eternal. It is humbling to think that the traditions we now treat as playful, a child in a mask, a candle glowing in a carved face, trace their lineage back through millennia of belief and longing. They carry the imprint of druids and legionnaires, saints and peasants, all bound by the same desire, to honor what was lost, to celebrate what remains, and to face the coming dark with light. As the Roman Empire waned and the medieval world began to rise from its ruins, the old festivals persisted in quiet corners, adapted, renamed, disguised, but alive. The next part of our story takes us into that twilight age, where the church, the village, and the superstition of the people met in uneasy alliance. But for now, let the embers of the Roman fire burn low. Picture them dying gently on the hill, their sparks drifting upward like tiny souls. The night is growing colder, and beyond it lies a new era, an age of faith, folklore, and fear. And somewhere, beneath it all, the ancient spirit of Samhain still stirs, waiting for its next form. Part 3, The Christian Veil, From Samhain to All Hallows. By the time the Roman Empire had begun to fade and the early medieval world took shape, the ancient fires of Samhain still flickered across the Celtic lands. They burned on hilltops, in quiet valleys, and in the memories of people who no longer called themselves pagans, yet still lived by the rhythms of the earth. The Church had come with its crosses and scriptures, its saints and sacraments, and though its reach was vast, its power did not erase what came before. Instead, the sacred and the old learned to coexist in shadow and candlelight. Out of that slow blending, the merging of pagan reverence and Christian ritual, Halloween, as we know it today, began to take its true form. In the early centuries of Christianity's spread across Europe, the Church faced an enormous challenge. The rural peoples of Ireland, Britain, and Gaul held fast to customs that had existed long before Christ's name was known. The missionaries and monks who arrived to convert them often found that these ancient observances were too deeply rooted to be extinguished. Instead of destroying them, the Church chose to reshape them, to drape the old festivals in Christian meaning, so that the people might keep their beloved traditions, but through the lens of the new faith. And so it was that Samhain began to wear a new name. The shift began quietly. By the 7th century, the Catholic Church had instituted a day called All Saints' Day, originally on May 13th, to honor the countless martyrs and holy men and women who had no feast day of their own. But as Christianity spread north and west into regions where Samhain still marked the end of the year, the Church began to see wisdom in moving the celebration to a date more aligned with local tradition. It was Pope Gregory III, in the 8th century, who officially dedicated November 1st as All Saints' Day. The night before, October 31st, became All Hallows' Eve. The evening before the day of the hallowed, or holy. It was a masterstroke of adaptation. The people could still light fires, feast, and remember the dead, but now, their actions were sanctified by the Church. Instead of invoking ancestral spirits, they prayed for the souls of the faithful departed. Instead of making offerings to unseen fairies or gods, they made alms and prayers for those in purgatory. And yet, for all these surface changes, the feeling of the night, the hush, the reverence, the sense that the unseen brushed against the mortal world, remained the same. In those dim centuries, life was fragile and faith was everything. Death was not distant but daily, and the idea that the living could help the dead through prayer gave comfort. All Hallows' Eve thus became a sacred vigil, candles flickered in windows, bells tolled for the souls of the departed, and the people knelt in the cold, whispering prayers into the night. The veil between the worlds was still thin, but now it was filled not with pagan spirits, but with Christian souls. By the 10th century, another layer was added. The Church introduced All Souls' Day on November 2nd, a day devoted entirely to praying for the departed faithful who had not yet reached heaven. This created a trilogy of remembrance: All Hallows' Eve, All Saints' Day, and All Souls' Day, a 3-day passage from the worldly to the divine. It was known collectively as Hallowtide. The people embraced it wholeheartedly. They saw in it a chance to honor those they had lost and to reaffirm that death, though inevitable, was not the end. The customs of these holy days were shaped by both theology and survival. In an age when famine, plague, and war were constant companions, communities turned to ritual for solace. On All Hallows' Eve, peasants and monks alike would light candles to guide wandering souls. The air was filled with the scent of smoke and damp earth, the sound of prayers rising into the chill. Some families left bread and milk on the table for spirits who might visit. Others carried torches through the fields to ward off evil. The Church may have changed the language, but the heart of Samhain, the mingling of light, darkness, and memory, still pulsed within it. As centuries passed, the Christianized Samhain spread across Europe. In England, France, and the Germanic lands, local variations took root. Souling became a widespread practice. The poor would go door to door on All Hallows' Eve, offering to pray for the souls of a household's dead in exchange for small cakes known as soul cakes. The exchange was simple, but profound, a mingling of charity and remembrance. Children often joined in, learning from a young age that generosity and prayer could bridge the gap between life and death. It was during this time that many of the customs we now associate with Halloween first began to take recognizable form. Lanterns carved from turnips or beets glowed along paths and window sills, their flickering faces meant to keep malevolent spirits away. Disguises were worn, not for amusement, but for protection, masks that hid the wearer from wandering souls or fairies who might seek to steal them away. The very act of dressing up was a survival of the ancient belief that, on this night of thin veils, one must move carefully among both the living and the dead. The medieval imagination thrived on contrast, the sacred and the profane, the holy and the haunted. And so, while priests chanted in stone cathedrals, villagers danced in fields lit by fire. The season of All Hallows was both a time of devotion and mischief. Young people played tricks, turned gates, and sang songs that mingled prayer with laughter. In these acts of harmless chaos, they expressed a truth the Church itself could not entirely deny, that death, though solemn, was also part of life's endless play. Art and literature of the time reflected this duality. Church carvings and manuscripts depicted dancing skeletons, the dance macabre, a reminder that death spared no one, king or peasant. Pilgrims carried tokens shaped like skulls to remind them of their mortality. Yet beneath these memento mori was not despair, but acceptance. Life was short, Death was sure, and the only proper response was faith, and, occasionally, joy. By the late Middle Ages, the 3 holy days of Hallowtide had become firmly entrenched. Every churchyard was alight with candles, every home smelled of spice and smoke. The bells that tolled for the dead also marked the living's gratitude for survival. The boundary between Samhain and Christianity had dissolved completely. What remained was something new and deeply human, a festival that united fear and faith, mourning and mirth, death and hope. This was the Christian veil, not a replacement for Samhain, but a transformation. The old gods had faded into saints, the spirits into souls, the fire into candlelight. Yet the meaning endured. It was still the time when the world grew still and people looked into the darkness and whispered, "We remember you." And perhaps that is why Halloween, in all its later forms, never lost its power. Beneath the games and costumes, it still carries the echo of that ancient night of remembrance, a whisper that the past is never gone, only waiting for the living to listen. As the centuries rolled on and the medieval world gave way to the Renaissance and the Reformation, new ideas would again reshape this ancient observance. The next chapter of Halloween's story unfolds in those shifting times, when faith fractured, reason rose, and yet the fires of October continued to burn. For now, the night has deepened. The church bells have fallen silent. The last candles gutter in the cool wind, and the souls, both remembered and forgotten, fade gently into peace. Part 4: Shadows of the Middle Ages, Superstition and the Soul. The Middle Ages were an age of faith, but also of fear. An era where light and shadow coexisted so closely that they seemed to breathe together. The church reigned supreme in thought and spirit, yet beneath its solemn rituals and vaulted cathedrals, the older world still murmured. The peasants, the monks, the midwives, the wanderers, all carried within them fragments of older beliefs, older rhythms. And nowhere did those echoes speak more vividly than in the night surrounding All Hallows. In these centuries, the Christian calendar governed every moment of life: birth, marriage, death, harvest, and prayer. Yet for all its structure, life was precarious. The threat of disease, famine, and war was never far. Every gust of wind, every failed crop, every unexplainable illness seemed to hold meaning. People looked for patterns in chaos, for signs of divine will, or devilish interference. The human mind, always searching for understanding, wove together faith and folklore until the two were inseparable. All Hallows' Eve became a focal point of that tension. It was still a night of prayer and remembrance, but it had also grown thick with superstition. The old belief in wandering spirits survived, dressed now in Christian robes. People spoke of souls released from purgatory to roam the earth for one night, seeking prayers to ease their suffering. Candles were set in windows to guide them, and bells were rung in church towers to comfort them. Yet not all who walked that night were thought to be kind. Some souls, it was said, could not find peace: murderers, oath-breakers, or those buried without proper rites. Their restless wandering lent the night its haunting air. Villages prepared carefully for Hallowtide. The faithful would fast, confess, and attend Mass. The fearful would hang protective herbs, mark their doors with holy symbols, or keep iron tools near the hearth to ward off spirits. Even the air was thought to change, colder, sharper, filled with invisible motion. Travelers avoided crossroads and graveyards after dusk. The world felt porous, as if unseen eyes watched from the hedgerows and fields. And yet, despite, or perhaps because of, this fear, the season held a strange joy. Death was not hidden in the Middle Ages. It was part of the rhythm of existence. Churchyards were social places where families gathered, markets thrived, and prayers rose among the tombs. People did not speak of death in whispers, they painted it, sang of it, and danced with it. This was the era of the danse macabre, the dance of death, a powerful image that swept across Europe in the 14th and 15th centuries. Painted on church walls and carved into wooden panels, it depicted skeletons leading people of every station, kings, priests, peasants, children, in a great, unending procession. The message was clear: death spared no one. Yet the art was not meant to terrify, it was a moral reminder. To live well, one must remember that life is fleeting. Each All Hallows' Eve, as villagers knelt before the candles of the dead, they also celebrated the persistence of life. Children ran between houses collecting soul cakes, singing simple songs that mingled piety with play. A soul cake, pray good mistress, a soul cake, they would chant, in exchange for food or coins. In giving and receiving, people wove together remembrance and generosity, the living feeding the living in honor of the dead. The souling tradition was perhaps the clearest bridge between the sacred and the everyday. It was an act of charity, but it carried echoes of older rites, offerings once made to appease ancestral spirits. Over time, the religious meaning softened, and the act itself became part of the culture's seasonal rhythm. Even those who doubted the old story still baked the cakes and gave them away, if only to keep peace with whatever lingered unseen. But the Middle Ages were also a time of deep unease about the boundaries between the holy and the profane. The Church's teachings on heaven, hell, and purgatory shaped how people imagined the afterlife, yet folklore filled in the details with imagery drawn from dreams and fear. Witches, demons, ghosts, and omens crowded the medieval imagination. A black cat crossing one's path could signal misfortune, an owl's cry might foretell death. And always, the late autumn night seemed charged with meaning. The bonfires of Samhain survived too, though transformed. In some places, they became bone fires, lit to consume the remains of livestock or harvest waste, a symbolic cleansing before winter. In others, they retained their spiritual purpose, warding off evil and illuminating the darkness. The smoke carried prayers, and the sparks rose like souls ascending. The communal gathering around those flames, the warmth, the shared food, the stories told against the wind, was a link across generations, a continuity older than any church decree. In monasteries and towns, the boundaries of All Hallows stretched beyond a single night. For days before and after, bells tolled for the dead. The poor wandered from door to door, not only seeking soul cakes but blessings. In return, they promised prayers for those who gave. The exchange was both social and spiritual, a network of kindness binding entire communities together. But not all nights were peaceful. The same superstitions that comforted could also condemn. The medieval fear of heresy, witchcraft, and demonic forces grew stronger as the centuries wore on. Women who practiced herbal medicine, those who spoke to spirits, or those who were simply eccentric risked suspicion. As the Church tightened its grip on doctrine, the shadows deepened. The same fire that had once been sacred became a symbol of judgment. Yet even amid that darkness, the soul of Halloween, its mixture of reverence, remembrance, and quiet fear, endured. The laughter of children, the smell of bread, the ringing of bells in the night, all of it spoke to the same truth. That life and death are intertwined, that to honor one is to understand the other. By the end of the Middle Ages, Halloween had become a fixture of European life. It was no longer purely pagan, nor purely Christian, but something human, a mosaic of faith, folklore, and feeling. The ancient bonfires still glowed faintly in every candle. The prayers of priests still echoed the whispers of ancestors. And through it all, the same question lingered: what happens when the living meet the dead? The next chapter of our story will carry us beyond the medieval world, into the age of reform and reason, a time when belief itself began to fracture, and old festivals took on new meanings. Yet the spirit of Halloween would not die. It would adapt again, reshaping itself to fit new hearts, new fears, and new hopes. For now, let the last church bell fade into the distance. Imagine the quiet village, the fog rising from the fields, the flicker of candles in cottage windows. The night is full of remembrance, of warmth and wonder. And as sleep approaches, remember, as the people of those dark centuries did, that the soul is never truly lost. Part 5: The Reformation and the Waning of Old Beliefs. The world that emerged from the shadows of the Middle Ages was restless. The old faith that had ruled for 1,000 years began to tremble, not with sudden collapse, but with the slow, steady cracking of its foundation. The Reformation had begun, a movement that would reshape the spiritual and moral landscape of Europe forever. Churches divided, nations turned against one another, and traditions that had once bound communities together were questioned, rewritten, or abandoned. Among those traditions was the autumn observance of All Hallows, the ancient descendant of Samhain. What had long been a night of prayer, remembrance, and lingering mystery now faced a new kind of scrutiny. It began in the early 16th century, when Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the door of the church at Wittenberg. The sound of that hammer, sharp and echoing in the cold air, seemed to strike through all of Christendom. Luther's protest was theological, but its consequences were cultural. He denounced indulgences, the selling of salvation, and challenged the idea that prayers or rituals could shorten the sufferings of souls in purgatory. To many, this sounded like liberation, to others, blasphemy. But whether embraced or condemned, the Reformation changed how people thought about the invisible world. In Protestant lands, the old feast days of saints and souls began to fade. All Saints' Day remained in the calendar for some, but its meaning thinned. All Souls' Day, with its prayers for the dead, was rejected outright. The practice of souling, once an act of charity, was condemned as superstition. Bonfires still glowed on October nights, but their purpose shifted. In England and Scotland, they became associated not with saints or spirits, but with the political fervour that followed, the gunpowder plot, the struggle between kings and churches, the celebration of human victory over perceived evil. The ancient fires of Samhain, reborn as the candles of All Hallows, now flickered in the name of earthly power. And yet, human nature is slow to let go of mystery. Even as doctrine hardened and theology turned rational, the imagination of the people continued to drift toward the old rhythms. In villages and remote parishes, where priests came rarely and literacy was scarce, the old customs survived like seeds beneath snow. The church might frown upon divination, but girls still gazed into mirrors on All Hallows' Eve to glimpse the face of a future husband. Clergymen denounced tales of ghosts, yet travellers still crossed themselves when a fog rose from the churchyard. The common folk held two truths in their hearts at once, the faith of the pulpit, and the wisdom of the hearth. The Reformation fractured not only religion, but community. Before, the churchyard had been the centre of social and spiritual life, its feasts uniting rich and poor, clergy and laity, living and dead. Now, suspicion replaced fellowship. What one called devotion, another called idolatry. The bells that once tolled for the souls of the departed were silenced in many towns, their sound declared popish. But where the church withdrew, the imagination filled the void. The world grew lonelier, but also more inward. Halloween, stripped of its sacred frame, began to take on a more personal, introspective tone, a night of private reflection rather than public ritual. It was during this period that the image of the wandering soul transformed into that of the wandering ghost. No longer seen as a spirit seeking prayers, the ghost became a restless remnant of guilt, sin, or unfinished business. Stories of hauntings multiplied across Protestant Europe, perhaps because the comforting structure of purgatory was gone. Where once there had been a system of intercession, a way to help the dead move on, there was now silence. The living could no longer pray souls into peace. Instead, they told stories about them, gave them names, and let them haunt the imagination. And so, in a paradoxical way, the rejection of old beliefs kept their shadows alive. The Reformation, which sought to purify faith, inadvertently preserved folklore. Every superstition it condemned survived as a whisper, every banned ritual as a memory. In the absence of ritual, narrative took its place. Sermons warned of Satan's cunning, and ballads spoke of spectral warnings and cursed oaths. The line between moral lesson and ghost story blurred. In Scotland, where Calvinist influence was strong, Halloween persisted stubbornly. The poet Robert Burns would later immortalize its rural customs in his 1785 poem Halloween, describing young lovers performing rites by moonlight, casting hazelnuts into the fire or walking backward into barns to summon visions. His verses reveal a truth the reformers could not extinguish, that beneath doctrine and dogma, people still longed to feel the pulse of the mysterious. They wanted to believe that on one night each year, the world opened just wide enough for the living to glimpse the unseen. In England, Halloween's transformation took another path. As the focus of the holiday drifted away from saints and spirits, it began to merge with November 5th, Guy Fawkes Night, which commemorated the foiling of the gunpowder plot in 1605. The fires of All Hallows merged with the political flames of celebration. Effigies of Guy Fawkes replaced lanterns for the dead, and the bonfires that once purified now burned in triumph. Remember the 5th of November, the rhyme went, a song of loyalty, not remembrance. Halloween, as it had been known, dimmed in much of England, lingering mostly in rural pockets and borderlands. But the spirit of it did not vanish. It simply moved across mountains, across oceans, into new lands and new hearts. The settlers who carried their memories of Samhain and Hallowtide to Ireland, Scotland, and eventually the New World, carried with them centuries of layered tradition, pagan fire, Roman ritual, Christian prayer, and folk superstition. By the late 17th century, Europe was changing again. The Enlightenment was dawning, bringing with it reason, science, and skepticism. The unseen world, once inhabited by spirits and saints, became the subject of debate rather than devotion. But even in an age of logic, the imagination refused to surrender its ghosts. The fires of Halloween might have dimmed, but beneath the surface, they glowed still, waiting for a new world to rekindle them. And so, as Europe's faith divided and its intellect expanded, Halloween quietly transformed once more. It shed its liturgical robes and took on a more universal meaning, a night not of theology, but of curiosity, memory, and play, a remnant of humanity's oldest need to face the dark with both reverence and laughter. The next part of our story will cross the sea. There, in the colonies of a new and growing world, the old traditions would find strange soil, and in that soil, they would bloom again, renewed by distance and time. For now, imagine the late medieval countryside fading into early modern dawn, bonfires cooling to ash, the tolling of church bells replaced by the ticking of clocks, the faith of a continent shifting beneath its feet. Yet in every quiet home, in every flickering candle and whispered prayer, the spirit of All Hallows still lingers, waiting for the wind to carry it westward. Part 6. Across the sea, the old world meets the new. When the ships of Europe set sail for the New World, they carried with them not only people, tools, and hopes, but ghosts. Every superstition, every tale told by firelight, every festival and custom buried deep in memory crossed the Atlantic in the minds of those who believed that even in foreign soil, the past could take root again. Among those carried traditions was the shadow of Samhain, softened by centuries of Christian and folk transformation, now waiting to awaken once more beneath new skies. The early colonies of North America were not kind to old festivals. In the 17th century, the Puritans of New England, fleeing religious persecution only to impose a stricter faith of their own, regarded such observances as dangerous remnants of paganism. They had left behind the ornate rituals of the Catholic Church, the feast days, the processions, the lighting of candles for the dead. They wanted a world cleansed of superstition, one governed by Scripture alone. Halloween, with its whiff of magic and its fascination with the unseen, had no place in their calendar. And yet, in the quiet corners of settlement life, the human need for wonder persisted. Outside the rigid colonies of Massachusetts Bay, in the more culturally diverse settlements of Maryland, Virginia, and Pennsylvania, older customs occasionally surfaced. Immigrants from Ireland, Scotland, and England brought their harvest traditions, some still rooted in the memory of All Hallows. They held autumn festivals to mark the end of the growing season, shared feasts, and told ghost stories in the dim candlelight of frontier homes. For these settlers, the wilderness itself seemed alive with spirits. The vast forests, the unfamiliar sounds of nocturnal creatures, the isolation of homesteads, all echoed the old sense that the veil between the worlds was thin. In time, colonial America developed its own forms of storytelling. The Puritan imagination, though disciplined by faith, could not completely silence its fears. It transmuted them into morality tales, accounts of witches, apparitions, and divine judgment. The most famous of these fears culminated in the witch trials of the late 17th century, particularly in Salem, Massachusetts. There, under the pressure of anxiety, isolation, and religious fervor, the people's fear of unseen evil erupted into tragedy. The events of Salem were not Halloween, but they revealed the same deep thread of superstition that had once given rise to the ancient fires of Samhain. For generations afterward, the settlers remembered Salem as both a warning and a fascination. The idea that evil could move unseen among ordinary people haunted their stories. It gave rise to a distinctly American form of ghost tale, less about spirits of the dead and more about guilt, conscience, and consequence. The purging fires of Samhain had become moral fires, burning within the human soul. But outside Puritan New England, the landscape of belief was far more diverse. In the southern colonies and among communities of Irish and Scottish immigrants in Appalachia, the old customs were kept alive in quieter ways. Children carved faces into turnips and beets, as their ancestors had in the old country, placing candles inside to ward off wandering spirits. Families told stories on the long autumn nights, tales of death and return, of headless horsemen and ghostly lovers. Each retelling blurred the line between folklore and faith until both became part of the same rhythm of the year. When the colonies became the United States, these small, scattered customs remained local, bound by region and memory. Halloween had not yet become a national event. But in the 19th century, everything began to change. The great wave of Irish and Scottish immigration during the 1800s brought with it the full, vivid memory of Halloween as it had been celebrated back home. The Irish, especially, carried the story of Stingy Jack, a trickster who outwitted the devil but was doomed to wander the earth with only a carved lantern to light his way. His jack-o'-lantern, originally made from a turnip, would become one of the most enduring symbols of the holiday. In America, where pumpkins grew large and plentiful, the story, and the symbol, transformed. The pumpkin, hollowed and glowing, became the face of Halloween itself. By the mid-19th century, America was a nation of immigrants, each bringing its own piece of the old world spiritual mosaic. Catholic and Protestant, Irish and German, Scottish and English, all found in Halloween a quiet common ground, a night where nostalgia and imagination could coexist. Communities began holding autumn parties that mixed harvest celebration with old world superstition. Apples were floated in water for games of divination, nuts were roasted for luck, lanterns were lit against the dark. It was, once again, a time of fellowship at the edge of winter. Yet beneath the laughter and games, Halloween in America still carried the echo of its ancient heart, the tension between life and death, light and shadow. In small towns and rural farms, people believed that the souls of the dead might visit on this night, that mischief and mystery walked hand in hand. But the tone was lighter than in Europe. The American Halloween, though born from the same fears, grew playful. It became less about appeasing spirits and more about enjoying the thrill of pretending they existed. By the late 19th century, this playful spirit found its voice in literature. Writers like Washington Irving, who gave the world the legend of Sleepy Hollow, captured the essence of this new world's fascination with old fears. His headless horseman, riding through the misty Hudson Valley, terrifying yet strangely romantic, was not just a ghost story. It was an echo of Samhain's eternal lesson that the line between the living and the dead is as much psychological as spiritual. Halloween, reborn in America, became a mirror for imagination, a night when people could explore the darker corners of the human heart safely, under the guise of fun. As towns grew and cities expanded, Halloween's rural rituals adapted to urban life. Communities held parades, masquerades, and autumn fairs. Newspapers published ghost stories and superstitions, blending nostalgia with novelty. The holiday was no longer just a private or local affair, it was becoming a shared cultural moment. In a sense, Halloween had come full circle. From the hilltop fires of Samhain to the flickering lanterns on American porches, the same instinct endured, to gather light against the darkness, to laugh at what might otherwise terrify, to honor what came before while embracing what lay ahead. The new world had taken the old world's fear and turned it into wonder. In doing so, it preserved something essential, the awareness that even in a rational age, mystery has its place. The autumn wind still whispered of unseen things, and the human heart, ancient as ever, still listened. The next part of our journey will move into the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when Halloween began to crystallize into the holiday we recognize today, shaped by industrialization, mass media, and the modern appetite for both nostalgia and fright. The bonfires would become jack-o'-lanterns, the prayers would become games, and the ghosts would trade solemnity for mischief. But before that, let the scene linger in your mind, a small farmhouse under a harvest moon, a carved pumpkin glowing in the window, and the faint echo of laughter carried on the October wind. The old world has crossed the sea, and its spirits are alive once more. Part 7, The Pumpkin and the Hearth, Halloween in 19th Century America. By the time the 19th century reached its golden middle decades, the holiday that had once belonged to fires and spirits had found a new home in the quiet glow of American hearths. The New World was no longer so new, its towns were thriving, its railways threading through endless plains, its citizens drawn from every corner of the old continents. The autumn harvests were abundant, the fields vast, and the long nights of October carried with them the same gentle melancholy that had haunted Celtic hillsides for thousands of years. Out of that mixture of plenty and nostalgia, Halloween began to take root again, less as an echo of dread and more as a season of storytelling, warmth, and playful mystery. The pumpkin became its emblem. In Europe, turnips and beets had served as the carved faces of warding, their small, gnarled shapes giving off a ghostly charm. But America's native pumpkin, round and golden, offered a new kind of magic. Its glow was generous, its light soft rather than eerie, and soon the carving of pumpkins became not a charm of protection, but a gesture of delight. Families would gather in lamplight, parents scooping out the seeds while children drew faces, sometimes smiling, sometimes monstrous, but always human in their humor. The old Samhain fear of spirits had turned into laughter shared between generations. Yet Halloween in 19th century America was still a patchwork holiday, its meanings shifting from place to place. In rural towns across New England, it remained tied to the rhythms of harvest, a last feast before winter, a night of apples and cider, of neighbors gathering to share stories by the fire. There was always a faint thrill in the air, a sense that October's last breath still carried something otherworldly. Ghost stories were told in parlors, not to terrify, but to entertain, their endings softened by laughter and reason. The supernatural was no longer a source of doctrine or dread, but of imagination. In Irish and Scottish immigrant communities, older customs remained more vivid. Young people played games of divination, placing apple peels over their shoulders to divine the initial of a future spouse, or gazing into mirrors by candlelight to catch a glimpse of love yet to come. These were remnants of ancient rituals of fate, gentled now into folk amusement. In every region, the holiday expressed the same longing that had defined it for millennia, the human desire to glimpse beyond the present, to believe for one night that the veil of the ordinary might lift just enough to let mystery slip through. As cities grew, Halloween began to spread beyond farm and village. By the late 1800s, the urban middle class, with its fascination for nostalgia and its appetite for seasonal festivity, began to adopt the holiday. Newspapers published columns on Halloween parties, describing tables decorated with autumn leaves and pumpkins, games involving apples and fortune-telling, and costumes that evoked fairies, witches, and ghosts. The tone was charming rather than dark. The night that had once belonged to druids and peasants now found its way into parlors lit by gaslight, where polite society could flirt safely with the thrill of the uncanny. This period marked a transformation, not only of Halloween's customs, but of its spirit. The grim overtones of death and purgatory that had once defined All Hallows' Eve in Europe gave way to something warmer, even romantic. The Victorians, with their love of sentimentalism and fascination with the afterlife, found in Halloween a perfect paradox, a holiday that acknowledged death, yet celebrated life's sweetness. They wrote poems about flickering lanterns and ghostly lovers, painted soft watercolors of autumn fields, and filled their homes with pumpkins, apples, and candlelight. Children were at the heart of this reimagined holiday. In an age when childhood was beginning to be celebrated rather than endured, Halloween became a rare moment when the strictness of Victorian decorum relaxed. Parents allowed games, pranks, and a touch of chaos. It was a night when rules bent, chairs were moved, doors creaked open, and sweets were shared in abundance. Mischief was tolerated because it belonged to the season itself. It was as if the world needed a small, harmless reminder that even in the age of progress and propriety, the wildness of the old world still breathed beneath the surface. Across the Atlantic, similar changes were taking place. In Scotland and Ireland, Halloween parties were growing increasingly secular, blending ghost lore with dancing and games. The church no longer watched closely over the night, its prayers had faded, replaced by laughter and storytelling. When immigrants from these lands wrote letters home describing their American lives, they spoke of how the holiday had softened, how it had become more about community than fear, more about play than penance. By the end of the 19th century, Halloween had entered the mainstream of American life. It appeared in literature and art as a symbol of harvest and hearth, of rustic beauty and gentle eeriness. Magazines printed illustrations of rosy-cheeked children holding lanterns, of black cats and falling leaves, of moonlit streets where spirits and humans seemed to share the same breath. The imagery of Halloween, once born of darkness, was now bathed in amber light. And yet, even amid this taming of the supernatural, the deeper emotions of the season remained. People still felt a quiet pull as the days shortened and the world slipped into frost. The scent of wood smoke, the sound of wind through bare branches, the memory of those who had gone before, all stirred something older than memory itself. Halloween, for all its modern refinements, still carried within it the ancient awareness that life and death walk together through the turning year. In small towns across the country, children ran laughing through the streets, their costumes simple, bedsheets for ghosts, straw hats for scarecrows. Families watched the flicker of their jack-o'-lanterns until the candles guttered and went out, the last flames reflecting softly in their eyes. The holiday had crossed oceans and centuries, transformed and reimagined, yet its essence endured, a shared night of light against the dark, remembrance softened by joy. The next part of our journey will step into the dawn of the 20th century, when Halloween, now embraced by modern America, began to change once again, shaped by new inventions, growing cities, and the restless spirit of a modernizing world. What had begun as sacred ritual and turned to hearthside festivity was about to become something larger, louder, and uniquely American. But for now, imagine a quiet farmhouse in 1890. The fields lie empty beneath a low, harvest moon. Inside, the fire crackles, the children drowse, and the carved pumpkin smiles faintly in the window. The world outside is vast and cold, but within, the light endures. Halloween, reborn once more, waits patiently for the century to come. Part 8, The Modern Masquerade, Halloween enters the 20th century. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the world shifted on its axis. Cities grew brighter, faster, louder. Electric light replaced candlelight, the hum of factories filled the air where the rustle of fields had once dominated. The rhythm of life quickened, but the spirit of Halloween, ancient, adaptable, eternal, kept pace. It followed humanity into the modern age, transforming yet again, carrying its blend of memory, mystery, and mirth into a new century that was learning to live with both the ghosts of its past and the machines of its future. By the early 1900s, America had fully adopted Halloween. The immigrants who had brought it across the sea now saw their grandchildren carving pumpkins not as superstition, but as celebration. Schools held small autumn parties, neighborhoods decorated with paper ghosts, corn stalks, and candlelit goods. The night that had once belonged to spirits and saints was now a festival for the living. The jack-o'-lantern glowed brighter than ever. Pumpkins had become a seasonal symbol, their carved faces lining city stoops and rural porches alike. Newspapers published patterns and advice columns for moderner designs, grimacing faces, laughing clowns, even patriotic motifs. The image of the grinning pumpkin spread across postcards and greeting cards, accompanied by rhymes and simple verses that turned the old fright into gentle fun. It was the age of postcards and parlors, of railways and telegraphs, of phonographs and photography. The world was recording itself for the first time, and Halloween, its imagery so distinct, so atmospheric, found an eager home in print. Artists like Ellen Clapsaddle and John Winch painted whimsical scenes of witches and harvest moons, black cats with shining eyes, children in pointed hats holding lanterns against a velvet night. The Halloween of the early 20th century shimmered between nostalgia and novelty, a holiday that looked backward to folklore even as it embraced modernity. In the countryside, the old games continued. Apples floated in water, chestnuts roasted on the hearth, children whispered fortunes into mirrors. But in towns and cities, Halloween became increasingly social. Schools and churches organized community events to replace the unruly pranks that sometimes marked the night. Safe celebrations encouraged costumes, games, and storytelling instead of mischief. The holiday was becoming more public, less about wandering spirits, more about gathering together under the glow of lanterns and laughter. Still, mischief had not disappeared. The early 20th century saw the rise of what newspapers began to call the Halloween problem, a wave of pranks that sometimes went too far. Gates were stolen, windows soaked, wagons overturned. It was as if, beneath the polite mask of progress, society's old appetite for chaos still needed an outlet. Communities responded not with repression, but adaptation. Rather than ban Halloween, they tamed it. Parties and parades were organized to give the young a space for playful rebellion. Out of this balance between disorder and design, the modern costume parade was born. The masquerade had ancient roots, stretching back to the disguises of Samhain and the masked revels of medieval Europe. But now, in the age of mass production, it became an art form for everyone. Costumes once handmade from rags and imagination began to be sold in department stores. Paper-make masks and crepe paper outfits flooded the market, offering witches, clowns, and devils in cheerful colors. For the first time, Halloween became a business. Yet commerce could not erase mystery. The early decades of the century were steeped in spiritual curiosity. The trauma of war, the influenza pandemic, and the rise of spiritualism all rekindled a fascination with the afterlife. Seances, ghost photographs, and table-rapping seances filled drawing rooms, blending entertainment with longing. Halloween, long the symbolic threshold between the worlds, became a night not of dogma, but of exploration, a chance to flirt with the unknown from the safety of the familiar. In these years, Halloween found its true dual nature. By day, it was a harvest celebration, pumpkins, candy, laughter. By night, it was a quiet meditation on mystery, a time when even the skeptical might feel the air shift and the past draw near. The newspapers of the era captured this tone perfectly. One could find recipes for witch cakes printed beside ghost stories, instructions for children's parties next to accounts of real seances. The holiday had become both spectacle and symbol, a cultural mirror of the human desire to make peace with the unseen. As technology advanced, Halloween imagery followed. Motion pictures, still in their infancy, began to experiment with horror and the supernatural. In 1922, audiences saw Nosferatu, its eerie shadows flickering in darkened theaters, evoking the same ancient fear of the threshold that Samhain once embodied. The connection between Halloween and horror was being forged, quietly, yet permanently. By the 1930s, America had embraced Halloween as its own. The Great Depression, with all its hardship, ironically helped solidify the holiday's modern form. Communities sought inexpensive ways to entertain and uplift, and Halloween provided the perfect occasion. Parades and public parties replaced vandalism, homemade costumes and decorations flourished. Newspapers encouraged trick-or-treating as a means to channel youthful energy into kindness rather than chaos. What had begun as ritual and evolved into festivity was now becoming a cultural tradition of generosity and fun. But even as Halloween grew lighter, it retained its old poetic melancholy. The October wind, the rustle of leaves, the scent of wood smoke, all reminded people of time passing, of seasons turning, of lives once lived. The jack-o'-lantern smile, bright and brief, became a symbol of that bittersweet awareness. Beneath the laughter, Halloween still whispered its oldest truth, that light and darkness need each other, that joy and sorrow are twin halves of the same mystery. By mid-century, Halloween was poised to become something even larger. The post-war world, with its suburbs, its children, its appetite for community, would soon make the holiday a national ritual of imagination and innocence. The old fires of Samhain, the prayers of medieval souls, the laughter of Victorian parlors, all of it would merge under the glow of street lamps and candy wrappers. But before that new age arrived, there was one last transformation to come, a moment when the mask would fully replace the prayer, when Halloween would become not only a remembrance of the past, but a reflection of who we had become, a civilization that laughed at its ghosts, yet never quite forgot them. For now, picture an American street in 1915. The night is cool and electric. Children run with paper lanterns, their laughter echoing off brick walls. In the windows, pumpkins glow like friendly spirits, and above them the moon, silent and eternal, looks down as it has for thousands of years, watching the living dance in the company of the dead. Part 9, the birth of trick-or-treating, from mischief to merriment. By the time the 1930s dawned, Halloween had settled into the heart of America, but it was still unruly, half-wild, a holiday without fixed boundaries. The pumpkins glowed, the masks multiplied, the stories spread through schools and small towns, yet the night itself remained unpredictable. For children, it was a thrill. For adults, sometimes a worry. Across neighborhoods from Boston to Chicago, October 31st was a night of pranks as much as play, a last echo of the ancient mischief once meant to mimic spirits or drive them away. But in the space of just 2 decades, that restless energy would transform into something gentler and sweeter. The change would give birth to the single most beloved tradition of modern Halloween, trick-or-treating. In the years before the custom took hold, Halloween mischief could be both playful and chaotic. Gates were lifted from their hinges and hidden in fields. Outhouses were tipped. Windows were soaked. Wagons were moved onto rooftops, and fences mysteriously rearranged. Newspapers ran headlines every November morning, half scolding, half amused, boys turned city upside down on Halloween night. Town officials debated curfews. Clergymen warned against devilish behavior. But deep down, people understood that this night was something older than delinquency. It was a release valve, a night when the young tested limits under the forgiving cover of tradition. Communities began looking for ways to keep that spirit of mischief while softening its edge. The solution, like so many cultural shifts, emerged not from decree, but from the quiet wisdom of mothers, neighbors, and teachers. In the late 1920s and early 1930s, civic groups and women's clubs began organizing Halloween parties, safe, supervised, and full of cheer. Churches hosted masquerades. Schools arranged pageants. The aim was not to erase Halloween's mischief, but to redirect it. It was in this climate that trick-or-treating was born. The practice likely evolved from several threads: the medieval custom of souling, where the poor begged for cakes in exchange for prayers; the Scottish and Irish guising, where children dressed in disguise and performed songs or jokes for coins or fruit; and the American instinct for community ritual. In small Midwestern towns, especially in places like Des Moines, St. Louis, and Kansas City, children began knocking on doors in costume, asking with cheerful boldness, "Trick or treat?" The phrase implied a choice: give a sweet or risk a prank, but in truth, most neighbors were delighted to hand over candy, apples, or homemade cookies. It was a simple exchange, but it changed everything. Trick-or-treating turned chaos into connection. The night of pranks became a night of generosity. Children moved from house to house not as vandals, but as welcomed guests, their laughter uniting entire neighborhoods. The idea spread quickly through word of mouth, newspaper columns, and eventually the new medium of radio. By the late 1930s, it had become a hallmark of Halloween in much of America. Then came the war. During the 1940s, as rationing tightened supplies of sugar and chocolate, Halloween celebrations grew quieter. Families gathered at home, carving pumpkins and telling stories by candlelight. Children still dressed up, but the spirit of the holiday turned inward. Halloween became less about the streets and more about the hearth, about continuity, even in uncertain times. Yet when the war ended and prosperity returned, the joy that had been restrained for years burst forth with new life. Candy was plentiful again, and trick-or-treating returned with a vengeance. The post-war years were a time of optimism and order. Suburbs spread across the land, neat rows of houses with friendly porches, sidewalks, and safety. Halloween fit perfectly into that new rhythm of community. In those quiet, freshly built neighborhoods, trick-or-treating became a ritual of belonging. Children in homemade costumes wandered in packs, their voices rising like birds in the dusk. Each porch was a small stage, each doorway a tiny theater of delight. Adults, smiling, handed out candy not only as a gesture of kindness, but as a reassurance that the world, after so much fear, could still be joyful. The candy industry quickly recognized opportunity. By the early 1950s, advertisements for Halloween treats filled newspapers and radio spots. Candy corn, once a humble autumn confection, became synonymous with the holiday. Small, individually wrapped chocolates and caramels were marketed specifically for trick-or-treaters. The holiday's new economic life helped it spread further than ever before, reaching not just towns but cities, not just children but families of every background. But more than candy or costumes, it was the spirit of trick-or-treating that captured America's heart. The act itself, knocking on a stranger's door and being greeted with generosity, was both innocent and profound. It turned fear into fellowship, darkness into community. It allowed children to walk through the night not as intruders, but as participants in something shared and ancient. Every trick or treat was a small echo of the old festivals of giving, when villagers exchanged blessings and food at the turning of the year. Television, the new hearth of the mid-century home, carried Halloween even further. Family shows and cartoons celebrated the holiday with humor and warmth. In 1952, Disney released Trick or Treat, a short film featuring Donald Duck and his nephews, helping to popularize the very phrase itself. A few years later, Peanuts brought the holiday to new heights with its The Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown, a tender, funny ode to childhood belief, disappointment, and hope. The story perfectly captured the heart of Halloween. The longing to believe that magic still walks among us, even when it doesn't appear. Through it all, the deeper rhythm of the holiday remained. The pumpkin still glowed in the windows, the wind still carried the scent of leaves and smoke, the moon still looked down with quiet understanding. Trick-or-treating did not erase Halloween's ancient heart, it translated it into the language of a modern, hopeful world. The old fire of Samhain had become a porch light, shining warmly through the dark. By the late 1950s, Halloween had become a national celebration, as familiar and cherished as Thanksgiving or the 4th of July. Yet beneath the laughter and candy wrappers, something timeless still stirred. The masks, the lanterns, the thrill of walking through the night, all whispered of humanity's oldest truth, that to face the dark together is the surest way to make it less frightening. The next chapter of this story will carry us deeper into that century of invention and imagination, when Hollywood and the horror genre claimed Halloween as their own, and the ancient festival of fire became the world's most famous night of fantasy. But for now, picture the quiet joy of a small-town street in 1950, children dressed as pirates and princesses, the sound of laughter carried on an autumn wind, and porch lights shining one by one like stars descending to earth. Halloween, reborn yet again, had found its truest modern form, a dance of shadows and smiles, rooted in both memory and light. Part 10, Silver Screens and Shadows, the Hollywood reinvention of Halloween. By the time the middle of the 20th century arrived, Halloween had already been reborn many times, shifting from sacred ritual to rural festivity, from mischief to merriment. But now, as the silver screens of Hollywood flickered across the nation, a new transformation began. The world's most ancient night was about to find its image in light and shadow once more. This time not in the glow of bonfires, but in the soft projection of film reels spinning through darkened theaters. The human imagination, always drawn to fear and fascination, had found a new way to keep the spirits alive. In the decades after World War II, cinema became the dream machine of the modern world. Every human emotion could be reflected there: love, loss, hope, terror. And Halloween, with its strange blend of innocence and unease, became the perfect mirror for that imagination. Its symbols, the moonlit street, the mask, the dark figure at the window, were ready-made for storytelling. Filmmakers recognized what ancient peoples had always known, that fear, when safely encountered, becomes a form of catharsis. Long before the holiday itself appeared in film titles, Hollywood had been courting the uncanny. In the 1930s and 40s, the universal monsters, Dracula, Frankenstein, the Mummy, the Wolfman, became household names. They were creatures of darkness, but not evil in the way older mythologies had understood it. They were tragic, lonely, misunderstood. The audience felt for them even as they trembled. These films, drenched in fog and shadow, resurrected something that had always been part of Halloween's heart, the sympathy for what haunts us. By the 1950s, as television began to glow in living rooms across America, the connection between Halloween and entertainment deepened. Families gathered not only around fireplaces, but around screens. Children watched The Twilight Zone and creature features, wide-eyed but safe, as ghosts and monsters came to life in black and white. Halloween became the season of storytelling once more, the same role it had played around Celtic fires, medieval hearths, and colonial kitchens. Only now, the stories were projected into every home, transforming fear into shared wonder. At the same time, the imagery of Halloween itself was taking shape in popular culture. The orange and black color palette appeared in advertisements and decorations. Comic books featured spooky specials each October. Magazines offered costume guides, party recipes, and spine-tingling tales that balanced fright with fun. Hollywood, ever alert to what captured the public imagination, began to use the season as backdrop and symbol. In films like Arsenic and Old Lace or The Ghost and Mr. Chicken, humor and horror danced together, just as they had at every stage of Halloween's long evolution. But then, in 1978, something new and defining happened. A low-budget film titled Halloween, directed by John Carpenter, arrived quietly in theaters and changed everything. Its story was simple, a masked figure stalking a quiet American town on October 31st. Yet in that simplicity lay something profound. The film stripped the holiday of whimsy and revealed its primal shadow. Beneath the candy and costumes, beneath the laughter of children and the glow of porch lights, there lingered an older rhythm, the awareness that darkness still walks beside us. The success of Halloween transformed both cinema and the holiday itself. For decades to come, the word Halloween would carry both meanings, the cheerful night of trick-or-treaters and the chilling whisper of unseen danger. Horror films multiplied in its wake, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Scream, each exploring in its own way the human fascination with fear. The mask became the modern talisman, not for protection, but for transformation. To wear a mask, in the oldest sense, was to step between worlds. Hollywood simply gave that ancient idea a modern face. Yet even as horror claimed the darker corners of the season, the lighter heart of Halloween endured. Family films like Hocus Pocus, Casper, and It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown reminded audiences that behind the screams was laughter, behind the shadows was warmth. The two sides, the terrifying and the tender, began to coexist, much as they had in Samhain's fires or medieval vigils. Halloween had always been about balance, between the known and the unknown, the living and the dead, the safe and the strange. Now, it lived that duality on screen. The power of cinema reshaped the holiday's rituals as well. Costume trends began to follow movie characters, vampires, werewolves, witches, and heroes filling the streets on October nights. Haunted houses, once modest community events, grew elaborate, inspired by film sets and special effects. Neighborhood decorations mimicked the imagery of the silver screen, fog machines, flickering lights, soundtracks echoing with wolves and whispers. Halloween had become a living theater, each home a small stage, each passerby an actor in an ancient, ongoing play. And still, through all the flickering illusions, the deeper current remained. The people who went to the movies in October were doing what their ancestors had always done, gathering in the dark to face the unknown together. The medium had changed, but the meaning had not. Every gasp in the cinema, every nervous laugh, every quiet moment before the lights rose again, these were modern versions of the same experience felt by those who once watched the firelight dance on stone walls. By the late 20th century, Halloween had become global. American films carried it across oceans, and its imagery spread like folklore reborn, the carved pumpkin, the masked stranger, the full moon over quiet streets. In places that had never known Samhain or All Hallows, children now dressed up and called out trick or treat. The holiday that began as a Celtic whisper had become a worldwide song, part commerce, part tradition, part collective dream. And through it all, the screen remained both mirror and flame. It reminded humanity of what Halloween had always been about, not just fright, but fascination, not just darkness, but the light we carry into it. So, imagine for a moment the dim glow of a theater in late October. The audience leans forward, breathless. A scream pierces the quiet, then laughter follows. Outside, the leaves swirl, and the air smells faintly of smoke and candy. Somewhere far away, in another age, the fires of Samhain still burn, and through the magic of story, they have found their reflection in silver light. Part 11, the suburban harvest, family, fantasy, and the American Halloween boom. By the middle of the 20th century, America had changed once again. The war was over, the economy was flourishing, and new neighborhoods were springing up like autumn mushrooms across the country. Rows of houses with white fences, trimmed lawns, and soft porch lights became the landscape of a new era, the suburban dream. And in these quiet streets, something ancient found a new rhythm. The autumn wind still whispered through trees, the moon still hung over the rooftops, and when October came, Halloween began to bloom like a second harvest, a festival of community, imagination, and warmth. It was a time of abundance. Families were larger, children filled the streets, and the world, weary from decades of fear and hardship, was ready to laugh again. The front porch, once a symbol of welcome, became the stage of a ritual that stitched neighbors together. When dusk fell on the last night of October, porch lights flickered on one by one, glowing like a constellation over the suburbs. The laughter of children replaced the old crackle of bonfires. The flicker of television screens had joined the flicker of pumpkins, and for the first time in history, Halloween belonged as much to the home as to the imagination. Every element of the holiday seemed to flourish in this new environment. The wide, safe streets of suburbia became rivers of movement on Halloween night, children flowing from door to door, their costumes bright against the deepening dark. Supermarkets and department stores sold candy by the bag, masks by the dozen. Costumes had once been stitched from scrap fabric or paper, now they arrived ready-made in boxes adorned with movie characters, superheroes, and cheerful ghosts. It was the commercialization of play, but it was also its democratization. Every child, rich or poor, could be someone, or something, else for one enchanted evening. The spirit of the holiday changed subtly. The older echoes of reverence, the sense of the veil between worlds, faded gently into the background. In their place came community and delight, the thrill of running through crisp night air, the rustle of leaves beneath small feet, the simple joy of knocking on a stranger's door and being met not with suspicion, but with kindness. Trick-or-treating had become more than a game. It was a ritual of trust, a performance of belonging. To hand out candy was to say, "You are part of this circle, you are safe here." For adults, Halloween offered something equally powerful: nostalgia. The parents who watched from porches had themselves been children in darker times, the Depression, the war. Now they saw in their children's joy a small triumph over fear. The night was no longer about warding off spirits, but about celebrating the sweetness of the present. The ancient instinct to light a fire against the dark had transformed into a bowl of candy, a porch light left on, a lantern glowing in a window. Humanity had not abandoned its old traditions, it had simply learned to express them with gentleness. Television, now the modern hearth, carried this warmth into every home. Programs like It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown captured the mood of the age, a tender blend of innocence, longing, and laughter. Linus waiting in the pumpkin patch for a mythical visitor was not so far removed from the people of long ago who waited for spirits to cross the threshold on Samhain night. Both were acts of faith in the unseen, expressions of hope that something magical might yet visit the world, even if only for an instant. The candy industry, of course, embraced the season with unreserved enthusiasm. Advertisements flooded magazines and television, turning brands into icons of the holiday. Chocolate bars, caramels, and candy corn became part of the ritual vocabulary of October. Each year, the treats multiplied and the symbols deepened. The pumpkin became a harvest god once more, this time rendered in orange foil and sugar. But for all its growing commercial face, the soul of Halloween remained deeply human. It was the only night of the year when strangers met without fear, when adults rediscovered the joy of play, and when the world seemed briefly to agree that imagination was worth celebrating. The masks and costumes, once meant to ward off evil, had become a way to explore the self. A child could be brave behind a pirate's patch, a princess could be mischievous behind a veil, and shy children could feel bold beneath painted faces. In every costume, there was a small liberation, a freedom that spoke to something timeless in the human spirit. In the wider world, the 1960s and 70s brought upheaval, civil rights movements, war protests, social change, but Halloween, strangely, endured untouched by bitterness. It remained an evening of unity, one night in which no ideology or division mattered. The shared customs, the lights, the laughter, the candy, became acts of quiet peace. The front porch became the last campfire of civilization, glowing gently in the cool dark. Still, beneath the laughter and bright plastic pumpkins, the holiday carried whispers of its deeper past. The dry rustle of leaves, the cold scent of earth, the long shadows between streetlights, all stirred an ancient recognition. Something older than any nation or religion lingered in the air, that same awareness of endings and beginnings, of death and renewal. Even the most modern Halloweens, filled with flashing lights and store-bought masks, could not entirely silence that whisper. The soul of the season, though softened, was still sacred. As the century moved on, Halloween became a fixture of American identity. Every October brought an orchestration of familiar signs, school parades, costume parties, pumpkin patches, and haunted houses. It became a shared language of joy, nostalgia, and creativity. Artists, writers, and musicians drew inspiration from it. Communities built entire economies around it. The holiday that had once marked the edge of winter had become a celebration of imagination itself. And yet, for all its transformation, Halloween remained strangely faithful to its origins. The Celts had lit fires to honor the passing of the sun. Modern families lit candles in carved pumpkins. The medieval peasants had sung from door to door for soul cakes, children now called trick or treat. The forms had changed, but the meanings endured: connection, remembrance, laughter in the face of the unknown. As the 20th century deepened, Halloween would grow even larger. Film, music, and pop culture would continue to reshape it, and the holiday would spill beyond North America to circle the globe. But in that golden mid-century moment, in the glow of suburban porches and the crisp scent of October leaves, Halloween found balance. It was no longer haunted by its past, nor consumed by its future. It had become what it always longed to be: a night of light, laughter, and shared wonder. So imagine it now, the suburban street at twilight. The air cool and fragrant, the pumpkins grinning softly, the sound of children's laughter drifting like wind through the trees. In that laughter is the echo of every fire ever lit, every prayer ever whispered, every story ever told to ease the heart through the coming dark. Halloween, once more, was home. Part 12, Ghosts of the Global Village, Halloween Around the World. By the late 20th century, the world had grown smaller. Airplanes shrank oceans, television erased distance, and the glow of electric light united cities and villages alike beneath the same restless sky. Traditions that had once belonged to a single land now drifted across borders like autumn leaves carried by the wind. Among them, none traveled farther or faster than Halloween. The night that began with bonfires in the misty hills of ancient Ireland and Scotland had crossed centuries and continents to become a global celebration, a curious blend of folklore, fantasy, and human longing. What was once a local ritual of harvest and remembrance was now, in a very real sense, a shared story of the entire world. The transformation began gently, almost invisibly. Through films, television, and literature, the imagery of Halloween, pumpkins, black cats, witches, and ghosts began appearing in countries far beyond America's borders. These symbols, so visually distinct and emotionally universal, resonated deeply with people from cultures that already had their own ways of honoring the dead or marking the passage of seasons. The holiday's charm lay in its flexibility. It could be solemn or silly, spooky or sweet, ancient or modern. It belonged to everyone and no one. In the United Kingdom, where the holiday's distant ancestors had been born, Halloween returned home in a new form. For generations, the British Isles had largely forgotten the night of Samhain, replacing it with the November 5th festivities of Guy Fawkes Day, bonfires and fireworks that celebrated rebellion and remembrance in a different key. But by the late 20th century, the American version of Halloween began to reappear. Children dressed in costumes and went from door to door, carving pumpkins instead of turnips, lighting candles, and whispering the same phrase their American cousins did: trick or treat. Some older generations grumbled that it was too commercial, too imported, too American. Yet the children didn't care. The joy of it was timeless, the thrill of disguises, the sweetness of candy, the laughter in the dark. It was the same spirit, only wearing a new face. Across the Atlantic, in Canada, Halloween thrived almost as naturally as in the United States. It had, after all, shared many of the same settlers, the same folklore, the same long winters and harvest moons. Canadian towns embraced it with enthusiasm, parades, parties, and pumpkin festivals marking the end of autumn. From Newfoundland to British Columbia, the night belonged to children, to laughter, and to the whisper of wind through fields gone bare. Further south, in Mexico and Latin America, the story was different yet beautifully parallel. Long before Halloween's arrival, these lands had celebrated El Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, a festival both mournful and joyful, honoring departed loved ones with music, food, and vivid color. While outsiders sometimes confused the two holidays, they were not the same. The Day of the Dead was a communion of love and memory, a conversation with ancestors. Halloween, in contrast, was a game with shadows. Yet over time, the two began to exist side by side, sometimes blending at their edges. Children painted their faces like skulls while also carrying jack-o'-lanterns, decorations mixed pumpkins with marigolds. The blending of the two traditions created something uniquely modern, a reminder that human beings, no matter where they live, share the same desire to honor death not with silence, but with beauty. In Europe, Halloween spread quickly. In France, where the festival of Toussaint, All Saints' Day, had long been a quiet religious observance, the sudden arrival of carved pumpkins and costumed revelry in the 1990s caused both surprise and delight. In Germany, where autumn had always been rich with folk customs, Halloween took root in a matter of years, merging easily with local harvest festivals and old ghost lore. Irish immigrants returning home found that the world had rediscovered what their ancestors had begun, and the island once again filled with orange lights and laughter each October. Asia, too, began to feel Halloween's pull. In Japan, where festivals like Hoben already honored the spirits of ancestors, Halloween arrived not as a replacement but as a spectacle, a modern carnival of color and imagination. Costumes grew elaborate, blending Western fantasy with Japanese artistry. In the neon glow of Tokyo, parades of vampires, robots, and anime characters filled the streets. What had once been a Celtic ritual under open skies now lived as an urban dream beneath skyscrapers. Yet the emotion was familiar, the joy of transformation, the freedom of play, the sense of living briefly in a world where the ordinary dissolves into wonder. In the Philippines, Halloween merged with Undas, the traditional All Saints and All Souls Day observances. Families visited cemeteries by candlelight, sharing food beside the graves of their loved ones. Children, inspired by American customs, began wearing costumes and collecting sweets, their laughter mingling with prayers and hymns. Across Asia, in places as far apart as South Korea, Singapore, and Hong Kong, malls and neighborhoods joined in, decorating with ghosts and pumpkins, hosting contests and haunted attractions. The imagery may have been new, but the feeling was ancient, the celebration of life against the encroaching dark. Even in places where Halloween had no historical roots, its atmosphere of play found a welcome home. In Australia and New Zealand, where October falls in the spring, the holiday arrived through television and film. At first, it felt out of place, the air warm, the night short, but soon it became its own tradition, adapted to the southern seasons. Children dressed in costumes under blooming jacarandas, pumpkins carved from imported goods, and the message of the holiday, the invitation to laugh at what frightens us, remained intact. In Africa, Halloween found new meaning again. In South Africa, festivals and costume parades began appearing in cities, mingling with local traditions of storytelling and ancestral remembrance. In Nigeria and Ghana, Halloween parties became popular among youth, blending Western themes with African folklore, the night spirits of old meeting the masked tricksters of the new world. Across the continent, the celebration evolved not through imitation, but through transformation. By the 21st century, Halloween had become truly global. It existed in cathedrals and clubs, in small villages and great cities, in the laughter of children and the artistry of adults. For some, it remained sacred, for others, it was simply fun. But beneath every mask and lantern, the same current pulsed, the human need to acknowledge mystery. To look into the night and smile. To accept, if only for one evening, that life and death, joy and fear, are all threads of the same tapestry. It is tempting to think that Halloween's global spread was driven only by media and commerce, and certainly those played their part, but that explanation misses something deeper. What people embraced was not just a holiday, but an idea. The idea that one night each year could belong to imagination, to play, to reflection. That the shadows could be friendly, that the past could walk beside us without terror. In a fragmented, fast-moving world, that idea offered comfort. It was ancient, yet modern. Pagan, yet universal. And so, as October now arrives each year across the planet, the same small rituals unfold everywhere, the lighting of candles, the laughter of children, the gathering of families under the watchful eye of the moon. Each culture adds its own rhythm, its own colors, its own stories, but the melody remains unchanged. The fires of Samhain have become a network of porch lights, festival torches, and glowing pumpkins spanning the globe, a chain of human light circling the earth. So if you close your eyes and listen on Halloween night, no matter where you are, you might hear it, the same whisper that rose from the Celtic hills thousands of years ago, softened by time but never silenced. It is the sound of connection, the murmur of generations calling softly across centuries. It says, we remember. We imagine. We are still here. Part 13, Masks and Meaning, the Psychology of Disguise. From the first bonfires of Samhain to the glowing suburban porches of modern America, the mask has been Halloween's most enduring companion. It has changed shape 1,000 times, woven from straw, carved from turnip, painted on porcelain, printed on plastic, but its essence has remained untouched. Beneath every disguise lies the same longing that shaped the holiday itself, the desire to become something else, if only for a night. To trade the weight of identity for the weightlessness of imagination. To hide, and by hiding, to be free. Long before the word Halloween existed, masks carried sacred power. Among the Celts, to cover one's face was to step beyond the ordinary world and into the realm of the spirits. The mask was both protection and permission. It hid the wearer from wandering souls while granting a momentary freedom to move among them. It allowed mortals to play at being supernatural, and the supernatural to pass unnoticed among mortals. That duality, fear and freedom intertwined, has haunted the mask ever since. As centuries passed, the mask outlived its rituals. In the medieval world, it became a feature of festivals and carnivals, moments when order inverted and peasants could mock kings without consequence. The Feast of Fools, the Venetian Carnival, the mumming plays of England, all were descendants of the same impulse, to step outside one station, to inhabit another face. For one night, society suspended its rules. The farmer became a knight, the servant a queen, the devout a devil. The mask was not deception, it was liberation. Halloween inherited this legacy fully. When the old bonfires dimmed and the prayers for souls gave way to games and pranks, the mask remained, the bridge between worlds, now worn with laughter instead of reverence. Even as the holiday softened and spread, the act of dressing up carried traces of the sacred. Children and adults alike felt the thrill of transformation, the strange joy of seeing their reflection changed. To put on a mask was to whisper to the universe, "Tonight, I can be anything." Psychologists have often written about the paradox of disguise, that to cover the face is to reveal the self. When we hide behind a mask, we allow hidden aspects of our nature to emerge. The shy become bold, the serious become playful, the fearful become fearless. In this sense, Halloween's disguises are not acts of concealment, but of revelation. They give permission to explore the unspoken parts of identity, to experiment with power, humor, danger, and delight in a way that everyday life rarely allows. In the early 20th century, masks were simple: paper-make witches, cardboard skeletons, crepe paper cats. By the 1950s, they were molded from plastic and packaged with names like Spooky Spirit and Little Devil. The faces were exaggerated but friendly, their expressions more mischievous than menacing. They reflected the optimism of the post-war era, fear made safe, the unknown turned into play. But as society evolved, so did the mask. In the 1970s and 80s, horror films gave the Halloween mask new intensity. The blank, expressionless face of Michael Myers, the twisted grin of monsters and villains, the intricate designs of fantasy creatures, all mirrored the growing complexity of modern fears. The mask became a canvas for collective imagination, a mirror reflecting what society found frightening or fascinating about itself. Behind every latex smile lurked something psychological, our fascination with what lies beneath the surface. Yet even as Hollywood and commerce transformed the mask into an industry, its deeper symbolism endured. Children still felt that same electric joy when the costume went on, the feeling of stepping out of time. Adults, too, rediscovered it in costume parties and masquerades, those fleeting evenings when laughter mingled with nostalgia. The act of disguise, whether in plastic or paint, still carried that quiet whisper of magic. For a few hours, the world became fluid again, boundaries softened, and imagination took the lead. In every culture where Halloween has taken root, masks have adapted to local meanings. In Mexico, the painted skulls of Dia de los Muertos honor ancestors while celebrating life. In Japan, Halloween masks merge Western horror with anime aesthetics, turning city streets into living art. In Italy and Spain, the legacy of Carnival still flows through the season, transforming fear into festivity. The mask, it seems, speaks a universal language, the language of transformation and release. Anthropologists sometimes call Halloween the night of sanctioned transgression. It is the one evening when the rules bend gently, when people are allowed to play with the boundaries that structure their daily lives. The mask is the key to that permission. It creates a space between reality and fantasy, where we can act out impulses we would never dare in the full light of day. It is a kind of dreaming, enacted while awake. Unlike dreams, it can reveal as much about the soul as it conceals. There is also a gentler side to the mask, one that speaks not of fear or rebellion, but of empathy. To wear a mask is to imagine oneself as another. A child who becomes a ghost learns what it means to be unseen. One who becomes a monster learns that even monsters have stories. In this way, Halloween's disguises teach compassion disguised as play. They remind us that identity is both fragile and flexible, that the faces we wear every day are themselves masks of a kind. As the 21st century unfolds, masks have taken on new meanings yet again. In recent years, they have been symbols of health, protest, art, and anonymity. On Halloween night, when the world is filled with digital faces and filtered identities, the old tradition feels almost prophetic. To wear a mask now is not to escape authenticity, but to explore it. The ancient rite of disguise remains a quiet reflection of the human condition, the longing to be seen, and the equal longing to hide. And so, each October, the ritual continues. Children tug on their costumes, adults paint their faces, the streets fill with laughter and transformation. Behind every mask, there is a story, a small reclaiming of mystery in a world that moves too fast. The ancient fires have faded, but their light still flickers in the eyes behind plastic and paint. Perhaps that is the real magic of Halloween. Not the ghosts or the monsters, but the invitation to imagine ourselves differently. To remember that the line between who we are and who we might become is as thin as the veil that once separated the living from the dead. To put on a mask, to step into the night, and to feel, just for a moment, the wonder of being more than one thing at once. So as you picture the streets this Halloween, filled with costumes and laughter, remember that this ritual is as old as storytelling itself. Every mask is a chapter in the long history of human imagination, a celebration of the mystery within us all. Part 14, Haunted Houses and Living Nightmares, the Rise of Fear as Entertainment. When people think of Halloween today, one of the first images that comes to mind, besides the jack-o'-lantern's grin and the rustle of candy wrappers, is the haunted house. Somewhere in almost every town or city, there is a place transformed for a single season into a world of shadows and surprises, where creaking doors, whispering ghosts, and sudden screams remind visitors that fear, when safely contained, can be a kind of joy. Yet this fascination with haunted spaces did not begin with amusement parks or horror films. It has its roots deep in the ancient heart of the season itself, in that enduring human instinct to make sense of the unknown by walking straight into it. The idea of the haunted house is as old as civilization. In ancient Greece, Rome, and Egypt, people believed that the spirits of the dead sometimes lingered in familiar places, unable or unwilling to move on. Stories of cursed homes, vengeful ghosts, and sacred thresholds appear in nearly every culture's folklore. But the modern haunted house, the one filled with flickering lights and mechanical shrieks, owes its existence to the same transformation that reshaped Halloween itself, the merging of fear with play, the blending of ritual with entertainment. To understand how that happened, one must first return to the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when spiritualism swept through Europe and America. Seances, ghost photographs, and spirit cabinets were not just novelties, they were performances of belief. The parlor became a stage where the dead seemed to speak, where illusion and faith intertwined. For the first time, ordinary homes became sites of spectral drama, where visitors could pay to experience the uncanny. This fascination with the unseen, this safe brush with fear, laid the groundwork for what would become the haunted attractions of Halloween. When electricity and cinema arrived, imagination had new tools. The flickering light of early film could mimic candlelight, shadows could dance larger than life. Audiences sat in darkened theaters and gasped together as ghosts appeared and vanished on screen. Horror, once confined to legend, could now be experienced. People discovered that fear, when shared, created a strange sort of pleasure, a quickened heartbeat that ended in laughter. Halloween, already a festival of inversion, became the perfect night for such thrills. By the 1930s, communities began experimenting with makeshift haunted spaces. Local youth groups, schools, and civic organizations transformed basements and barns into spook houses, draped in sheets and lit by lanterns. These early haunts were simple. Bowls of peeled grapes passed off as eyeballs, actors hidden behind curtains, ghostly figures projected with mirrors. But what they offered was revolutionary, a way to bring fear to life without real danger. Visitors could step through the door, surrender to the darkness, and emerge laughing on the other side. The ritual of facing the unknown had found a modern form. The haunted house as we know it took off in the mid-20th century. Walt Disney's Haunted Mansion, which opened in 1969, marked a turning point. It combined cutting-edge technology with timeless Gothic charm, inviting guests into a world where humor and horror coexisted in perfect harmony. The ghosts were mischievous, not malevolent. The fear was theatrical, not traumatic. Millions of visitors left smiling, having glimpsed the darkness and found it delightful. The attraction proved that fear, when filtered through art and design, could be a form of comfort, an affirmation that what scares us can also entertain us. In the decades that followed, haunted houses became a seasonal art form. By the 1980s and 90s, professional attractions appeared in every state, growing more elaborate with each passing year. Abandoned warehouses were filled with smoke machines and animatronics, cornfields became labyrinths of light and sound. Entire industries formed around the design of fear, sound engineers crafting footsteps and whispers, carpenters building false walls and collapsing floors, makeup artists turning volunteers into monsters. Each autumn, these creators revived an ancient task, to make the invisible visible, to give form to the formless. At their core, haunted houses tap into something primal yet profound, the human love of storytelling through space. To walk through a haunt is to move through a narrative. Each hallway, each sound cue, each fleeting figure tells a part of the tale. The visitor becomes both participant and audience, both dreamer and dream. This active role is what makes the experience so powerful. Unlike a film or book, the haunted house surrounds you, erasing the boundary between imagination and reality. For a few minutes, you are inside the story. And yet, despite their sophistication, haunted houses preserve a strange innocence. They rely on the same mechanisms that frightened and thrilled children centuries ago: darkness, surprise, the laughter that follows a scream. The heart of the experience is not terror, but trust, the understanding that the fear will end, that it is safe to be afraid. This paradox, this dance between fear and safety, has always been Halloween's rhythm. It is what separates the night from horror and makes it, instead, a celebration of courage and play. There is another layer to the haunted house, one that few visitors consider as they walk through flickering corridors. It is the echo of ancient ritual. Long ago, communities faced their fears together by performing them, by dancing in masks, by lighting fires, by telling stories of ghosts so that the ghosts would not seem so powerful. Today's haunted attractions continue that tradition. They are communal expressions of fear turned into art, reminding us that facing darkness is easier when we do it side by side. The psychology of these experiences is fascinating. Scientists who study fear responses have found that the brain releases dopamine and endorphins when startled in a safe environment. The result is not panic, but exhilaration. It is the same rush that ancient storytellers must have felt when their listeners gasped by the firelight. The haunted house, then, is not just spectacle, it is therapy of a kind. It allows us to practice bravery, to embrace uncertainty, to emerge laughing from the shadows. In the modern age, haunted houses have diversified. Some are Gothic and romantic, filled with candlelight and cobwebs, others are cinematic, inspired by the monsters of film and television. In recent years, interactive and immersive haunts have blurred the line between theater and nightmare, asking visitors to make choices, to confront moral dilemmas, to explore the psychology of fear itself. Yet even the most elaborate attractions share a quiet kinship with the simplest pumpkin glowing on a doorstep. Both remind us that imagination can transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. And beyond the thrills, there is beauty in the haunted house. The craftsmanship, the lighting, the choreography, all are acts of creativity rooted in tradition. Each haunt, in its own way, is a love letter to the human imagination's ability to find art in fear. Every scream, every laugh, every hurried heartbeat is proof that we are alive, that we still respond to mystery the way our ancestors did, by stepping closer to it, rather than away. So, when October comes and the haunted houses open their creaking doors once more, think of them not as places of terror, but as modern temples of storytelling. Inside them, fear is not an enemy but a guide, leading us back to that oldest understanding of all, that darkness is not meant to be avoided, but explored. And when the night is over and you step back into the cool autumn air, the sound of distant laughter still echoing behind you, remember that the real magic of Halloween has never been about ghosts or monsters. It has always been about this simple, quiet act of courage, the willingness to walk into the dark and discover, at its heart, only the reflection of our own humanity. Part 15, The Night of Light, Candles, Pumpkins, and the Return of Fire. Every October, as the days shorten and the light softens into amber, something ancient stirs in the heart of autumn. Porch lights glow like miniature suns, candles flicker behind smiling pumpkins, and the old ritual of fire, once used to guard against winter's darkness, returns quietly in the form of modern decoration. Long before plastic lanterns and string lights, before jack-o'-lanterns and porch bulbs, human beings gathered around flames for warmth, for safety, for remembrance. Though the shapes of our fires have changed, their purpose has not. On Halloween night, when the sky seems to breathe and the wind carries a chill whisper, we light our homes not only to see, but to remember. Fire has always been the heartbeat of Halloween. In the beginning, when Samhain was still new, great bonfires blazed on the hills of ancient Ireland. The Celts believed that as the sun's power faded at the end of the harvest, these sacred fires could help renew it. Families extinguished their hearths at home and relit them with embers from the communal flame, carrying warmth and luck into the long winter ahead. The fire's glow was not just light, it was life itself, an act of faith against the cold. To stand before that fire was to feel part of something larger than fear, larger even than death. When Christianity arrived in Europe and transformed the pagan festivals into holy days, the great fires of Samhain did not entirely vanish. They simply changed names, becoming the vigil candles of All Hallows' Eve, lit in memory of the departed. Across the centuries, as cultures blended and meanings shifted, the fire's role persisted. It symbolized remembrance, protection, and hope, the eternal flame that kept the living connected to those who had gone before. In the villages of medieval Europe, people carried small lanterns made from hollowed-out turnips or beets, their rough surfaces carved into crude faces. These early jack-o'-lanterns were meant to frighten away wandering spirits or mischievous fairies during the night when the veil between worlds thinned. The flickering light inside each vegetable was a miniature bonfire, a portable charm against the dark. The custom spread across the British Isles and eventually sailed to the New World with immigrants who brought their old stories with them. In America, the pumpkin, bright, round, and hollow, transformed the ritual. Its color evoked the harvest sun, and its size offered a generous canvas for carving. What had once been a small charm became a glowing work of art. The pumpkin lantern's face, whether grinning or grimacing, seemed to contain a spark of personality. When families began setting them on porches and windowsills, they were not just decorations, they were guardians of the home, echoes of the ancient watchfires. By the 19th century, jack-o'-lanterns had become central to the Halloween landscape. They appeared in poems and illustrations, glowing softly amid fields and orchards. As electricity spread, their light took on new meaning, a nostalgic reminder of the candle's warmth, a bridge between the past and the present. Even now, in an age of LEDs and neon, the flicker of a flame inside a pumpkin feels alive in a way no bulb can imitate. It moves, it breathes, it dances like the spirits it was once meant to ward away. The act of lighting a jack-o'-lantern is small, almost humble, yet deeply symbolic. Each year, millions of people carve pumpkins without realizing they are participating in a ceremony older than written history. The scraping of seeds, the carving of the face, the careful placing of the candle, all are gestures that trace back to humanity's earliest relationship with fire. The moment when the candle is lit and the face begins to glow carries a quiet magic. It transforms something ordinary into something luminous. It reminds us that even the simplest object can become a vessel for light. The same is true of the candles that glow in windows, lining pathways, or illuminating parties. Though the reasons may have changed, the instinct is the same. We light candles on Halloween not just to decorate, but to create atmosphere, to make the night beautiful rather than frightening. In their soft light, the shadows seem less threatening, the darkness less final. Each flame whispers a small truth, that warmth and hope can still exist in the coldest months. Fire, of course, has always been both creation and destruction. It gives light, but it can also consume. This duality mirrors the nature of Halloween itself, life and death intertwined, fear and comfort held in delicate balance. When we light candles on this night, we are acknowledging both sides. The flame is fragile, like life, but in its fragility lies its beauty. It burns knowing it will end, and that is precisely what makes it meaningful. In the 20th century, as Halloween became a fixture of modern culture, the imagery of fire evolved into art. The orange and black colors of the holiday, borrowed from the fire and its shadows, adorned decorations, costumes, and candy wrappers. Bonfires were replaced by community events, fireworks, and glowing lanterns. Yet even as technology replaced the real flame with imitation, the emotional memory of the fire endured. Humanity's need for light in the dark is not merely physical, it is spiritual. In some towns, especially in rural America, bonfires still burn on Halloween night. They are smaller now, contained and ceremonial, but they echo the ancient ones. Around them, people gather as their ancestors did, sharing stories and laughter as sparks drift up into the sky. The fire becomes a symbol of connection, not just to the past, but to one another. The faces illuminated by its glow are the same faces that have circled firelight for thousands of years, bound by the same longing to belong, to remember, to be warm in a cold world. And then there is the light of memory. The unseen fire that burns within us. On Halloween, whether we know it or not, we honor those who came before, not through prayer or ritual alone, but through the very act of keeping light alive. Every candle flicker, every pumpkin grin, every porch bulb glowing in the dark says, "We have not forgotten." It is a quiet defiance against oblivion. When the night deepens and the candles begin to gutter, there comes a moment of stillness, the world holding its breath between light and shadow. In that moment, if one listens closely, the crackle of a candle's flame can sound like a voice from long ago. It murmurs of continuity, of warmth passed from generation to generation. The fire may change its form, but it never truly goes out. So when you see a line of pumpkins glowing along a street, or a single candle flickering in a window on a windy night, know that you are witnessing an ancient conversation between humanity and the dark. The flames speak across millennia, reminding us that the purpose of light has never been to conquer shadow, but to coexist with it, to give it shape, to make it beautiful. The fires of Samhain have become gentle now, their smoke replaced by the scent of melting wax and roasted pumpkin seeds. But their meaning endures. To light a flame is to declare, "We are here. We endure." The dark may come, but it will not find us unready. And as you drift to sleep, perhaps with a candle's afterglow lingering in your mind, imagine those ancient hills once more, the fires burning bright against the night sky, the people gathered close, faces half-lit, half-shadowed. They were not so different from us, humans seeking warmth, seeking connection, seeking meaning in the turning of the year. Their flames burn still, through us, through every small light we kindle on this sacred, gentle night. Part 16, The Music of October, Sounds, Songs, and the Spirit of the Season. Every season has its music. Spring hums with renewal, summer sings with joy, winter whispers its stillness. But autumn rustles. It breathes in low tones, in the steady sigh of wind through branches, in the murmur of leaves as they drift down to earth. By the time October comes, the year itself seems to settle into rhythm, a slow, contemplative waltz between warmth and cold, light and dark. And at its heart, Halloween adds its own harmony, a soundscape of laughter, whispers, and things that go bump in the night. It is the symphony of transition, a melody both haunting and human. Long before orchestras and radios, sound shaped the season's spirit. In the ancient celebrations of Samhain, music was a form of connection. The crackle of fire, the beating of drums, and the rise of voices chanting beneath the stars, these were not mere entertainments. They were acts of communion. The Celts believed that as the year turned toward darkness, the walls between worlds grew thin, and music could carry across that divide. It was both offering an invitation, a way to honor what had passed and to call what might come. The earliest songs of the season were probably simple, chants to the harvest, rhythmic dances meant to mimic the pulse of life fading into winter. But even then, the sound of October had two moods, celebration and reflection. The same drumbeat that drove the dancers also echoed the heartbeat of time itself. There is something in the very air of late autumn that lends itself to rhythm, something in the hush of dusk that invites melody. The world is quieter then, and every sound feels more sacred. As the centuries passed and Halloween took shape in medieval Europe, music followed it indoors. The clamour of bells marked All Hallows' Eve and All Souls' Day, calling the living to remember the dead. The tolling carried across villages, solemn and slow, like the breath of the year itself. Yet even amid the prayers, there were songs of mischief and play. Children and beggars went from door to door, singing four-soul cakes, offering blessings in exchange for food. These small performances, half prayer, half jest, were the ancestors of caroling and trick-or-treating alike. The night had its own sound, both reverent and rowdy. By the Victorian era, when Halloween was reborn as a festival of nostalgia and hearthside gathering, its music softened. Families gathered around pianos in candlelit parlors, playing folk tunes that celebrated autumn's beauty and the mysteries of the spirit world. The old Irish and Scottish ballads, songs of love lost, of ghosts returning, of harvest moons and fading light, became staples of the season. Their melodies were slow and wistful, their lyrics filled with longing. Even when Halloween was no longer about spirits in the literal sense, the music carried that same ache for what had been lost and might never return. Then came the modern age, with its recordings and radios, and Halloween's soundscape expanded again. The scratchy voice of a gramophone could fill a parlor with the laughter of a jazz band or the eerie whistle of a theremin. By the 1930s and 40s, composers were experimenting with sounds that mimicked fear, the sudden minor chords, the tremor of violins, the low hum of suspense. Hollywood horror films taught entire generations what fright sounded like. From the deep organ notes of Dracula to the shrieking strings of Psycho, the art of musical fear was born. Yet the music of Halloween is not all terror. Alongside the symphonic shivers came songs of playfulness and humor. The Monster Mash, Thriller, Ghostbusters, these became modern folk songs, every bit as ritualistic as the chants of old. Their melodies return every October like migrating birds, filling stores, school dances, and parties with cheerful spookiness. They turn fear into rhythm, making the macabre danceable, the eerie endearing. In their own way, they carry the same message as the ancient drums. Darkness can be faced if we move to its beat together. Beyond the lyrics and melodies, though, lies a subtler kind of music, the natural symphony of October itself. The crunch of leaves underfoot, the wind moaning through half-bare trees, the distant barking of dogs, the faint laughter echoing down quiet streets. On Halloween night, especially, every sound feels amplified. The hush between footsteps, the creak of a gate, the whisper of fabric as a costume brushes past, these are the notes of the season's living orchestra. Nature and humanity collaborate in a song that has no composer, only listeners. Even silence plays its part. There is a certain stillness in late October nights that hums with possibility. After the laughter fades and the wind calms, when only the faint flicker of pumpkin light remains, a deep quiet settles over the world. It is not an empty quiet but a full one, rich with memory. It feels as though the earth itself is listening, holding its breath as the year turns. That silence is perhaps the oldest sound of all, the one our ancestors heard after the fires burned low, the sound of the night accepting their prayers. Today, Halloween's music is as diverse as the world that celebrates it. In some places, orchestras perform haunting symphonies by candlelight. In others, DJs remix ghostly tunes into beats that pulse through crowded streets. The soundtrack of the season blends centuries, ancient chants and electronic rhythms, sacred hymns and pop songs, lullabies and screams. And yet, beneath all the variety, one theme remains: the coexistence of fear and joy, life and loss, light and dark. That duality is what gives Halloween sounds their strange beauty. The laughter of children trick-or-treating mixes with the howl of the wind. A cheerful melody fades into the creak of an old floorboard. Even the songs written to entertain carry a faint echo of something eternal. They remind us that beneath the playfulness, Halloween has always been about listening. To the world, to one another, to the passage of time itself. As you imagine the music of October, the footsteps on damp leaves, the hum of far-off voices, the low sigh of the wind, let it wash over you like an old lullaby. It is the song of endings and beginnings, of the earth preparing for sleep. In that music lies comfort. It tells us that fear is just another kind of rhythm, that every shiver can resolve into harmony. And so, as the final nights of October approach and the air grows still, listen closely. Whether it's the faint strains of a song from a passing car, or the natural chorus of autumn itself, you'll hear it, the ancient melody of Halloween, still playing softly beneath the noise of the world. A melody that says, the year is turning. Rest now. Dream well. Part 17, The Children of the Night, Trick-or-Treaters and the Ritual of Community. Every Halloween night, as the last light of the sun sinks behind the rooftops and the air turns cool enough to make the skin prickle, a familiar sound begins to rise. It starts as a murmur, then a chorus, laughter, footsteps, the rustle of costumes brushing against doorways. All across towns and neighborhoods, from the smallest village to the largest city, children spill into the streets, glowing under porch lights and lamp posts like a living constellation. Their voices carry through the night, trick or treat. Two simple words that hold within them centuries of memory, myth, and meaning. It is one of the few rituals in the modern world that still unites communities face to face. On this single evening, doors open freely. Strangers greet one another without fear. Adults become hosts, children become adventurers, and the night, ordinarily a realm of solitude, fills with laughter and trust. It is a ceremony disguised as play, an echo of ancient exchanges where gifts were given, blessings received, and the living honored the spirits by sharing what they had. The children may not know it, but as they walk from house to house, they carry with them a tradition as old as the fires of Samhain. The modern custom of trick-or-treating began as a modest experiment in kindness. In the early 20th century, towns tired of Halloween mischief looked for ways to turn youthful energy toward joy instead of vandalism. Communities began hosting parties and encouraging children to visit homes politely, to receive treats in exchange for songs, rhymes, or promises of good behavior. The phrase trick or treat first appeared in print in the 1920s, a gentle reminder that generosity could prevent mischief. It spread rapidly, not because of marketing or mandate, but because it felt right. It brought people together at a time when urban life was growing impersonal. After the hardships of the Great Depression and the separations of war, the sight of children laughing on Halloween night became something sacred. The returning soldiers, the weary parents, the newly built neighborhoods, all found comfort in this shared ritual. It was as though the world had been holding its breath for too long, and now, in the cool October air, it could finally exhale. The holiday became a symbol of safety and normalcy. A porch light left on was not just an invitation for candy, it was a declaration of peace. As decades passed, trick-or-treating became a thread in the fabric of American life. In every corner of the country, the pattern repeated, children dressing in homemade or store-bought costumes, their small hands clutching paper bags or plastic pumpkins, their laughter spilling down sidewalks. Each doorway was a moment of connection, a brief exchange between generations. For adults, there was a quiet joy in recognizing their own childhoods reflected back at them, the same excitement, the same chilly wind, the same thrill of seeing one's breath under a harvest moon. There is something timeless about the way children move through the night on Halloween. Their shadows flit across lawns, their voices echo faintly in the crisp air, and the rhythm of their footsteps seems to match the slow pulse of the earth turning toward winter. They are explorers, yet they are also symbols, living reminders of renewal. In their laughter is the promise that the world's stories, its customs and rituals, will endure. The fires of Samhain once kept the tribe safe through winter. Now the laughter of children keeps the spirit of community alive through the long, dark nights of modernity. Every costume tells a story. A witch, a ghost, a superhero, all are masks of transformation, reflections of the imagination's infinite forms. To see a street filled with disguised children is to witness humanity's oldest dream made visible, the dream of becoming more than what we are. Beneath the paint and plastic, something ancient stirs. It is the same impulse that led villagers to paint their faces in ash and wear animal skins by firelight. It is the instinct to play with identity, to walk the line between the human and the otherworldly, to find courage in make-believe. And then there is the ritual of the knock. Each door is a threshold, each step onto a porch a small act of bravery. For a child, the simple act of approaching a stranger's home in the dark and asking for kindness is a lesson wrapped in joy. It teaches trust and gratitude. It reminds them that generosity still exists, that the world is not only vast and mysterious but also kind. For the adults who answer the door, there is a quiet grace in the exchange. The giving of sweets becomes symbolic, a reenactment of hospitality, of community, of care. In a world that too often feels disconnected, this fleeting moment of shared warmth carries a rare sincerity. As night deepens, the rhythm continues, footsteps, laughter, the soft clink of candy tumbling into buckets. Parents watch from sidewalks, coffee cups steaming in their hands, their faces lit by street lamps and pride. The wind carries the scent of leaves and sugar, the faint sound of distant music, and the hum of countless small moments unfolding all at once. This is the heartbeat of Halloween, not the masks or the movies or the candy itself, but the collective act of stepping outside, of coming together, of honoring light and laughter in the dark. In recent decades, the ritual has adapted to changing times. Some communities hold trunk-or-treat events in parking lots, safe havens for families to gather. Others bring the spirit indoors, to schools or churches. But whether the setting is a suburban street or a small-town square, the essence remains the same. It is the gathering that matters, the shared acknowledgement that for one night each year, we belong to each other. Even when the night grows late and the crowds thin, the echo of it lingers. The sidewalks are strewn with fallen leaves and candy wrappers, the air still tinged with laughter. Porch lights flicker off one by one, leaving behind a deep, satisfying quiet. It is a quiet filled with memory, the sound of doors opening, of voices calling thank you, of 1,000 small acts of connection that make up the fragile, glowing fabric of community. Perhaps that is Halloween's truest gift. It reminds us that even in a world of isolation and distance, there remains a hunger for simple, shared joy. A porch light shining in the night is more than a decoration, it is a beacon. It says, you are welcome here. It says, we are still a village. And so, year after year, as the days grow shorter and the air turns colder, the children of the night return. They come in capes and masks, with laughter in their voices and courage in their steps. They are the keepers of an ancient promise, the carriers of a flame that no darkness can extinguish. For as long as they walk beneath the autumn moon, knocking on doors and calling out to strangers with open hearts, the world will never truly be lonely. Part 18. The spirit of nostalgia, memory, myth, and the passing of time. As the last night of October draws near each year, there comes a peculiar stillness in the air, a hush that feels both familiar and distant, as though the season itself is pausing to remember. The leaves fall more slowly. The wind seems to sigh rather than howl. The porch lights flicker softly in the growing dark, and the smell of smoke and earth carries the mind backward, toward something half-remembered, half-imagined. This is the true heart of Halloween, not fear, not even festivity, but remembrance. The holiday, like the year it marks, is as much about looking back as it is about living in the moment. It is a night woven through with nostalgia, that tender ache for things lost and times gone by. Halloween has always been a mirror for memory. Every generation inherits it, reshapes it, and passes it on, layering its own meanings atop the old ones like leaves in the forest. Beneath the plastic pumpkins and costumes, beneath the laughter and music, lie the echoes of bonfires, prayers, and whispered stories. To celebrate Halloween is, knowingly or not, to stand at a crossroads between eras, to feel the weight of history pressing gently at one shoulder. The flicker of a jack-o'-lantern on a porch in the present holds within it 1,000 flickers from the past, candles in turnips, torches in fields, flames on stone altars. Each glow a heartbeat of memory refusing to go out. The nostalgia of Halloween is different from that of any other holiday. It is not rooted in perfection, but in impermanence. It remembers not only joy, but the melancholy that gives joy its sweetness. The chill in the air, the dying of the leaves, the knowledge that winter is near, these things lend the season its beauty. The nostalgia of Halloween is a gentle mourning, a recognition that all things end and that endings, too, have their grace. The laughter of children fades into the distance, the candles burn low, the pumpkins collapse into the earth. And yet, next year, it all begins again. This rhythm of vanishing and return is what makes the holiday eternal. For those who grew up with Halloween, the crisp rustle of costumes, the excitement of approaching porches glowing in the dark, the season holds a special kind of memory. It is a time capsule, sealed in childhood wonder. No matter how old one grows, the sight of a jack-o'-lantern or the smell of autumn leaves can unlock that sensation of innocence, the quickened heartbeat, the laughter echoing under a full moon, the feeling that magic might actually be real for just one night. It is nostalgia not only for youth, but for belief itself, the ability to live without cynicism, to feel or without irony. As adults, we return to Halloween not just to indulge in play, but to touch that lost simplicity. When we hand out candy to trick-or-treaters, we are not merely giving sweets, we are participating in a cycle of memory. We see in each costume our own reflection from years ago, and in each small voice calling trick or treat a reminder that wonder has not died, only changed hands. The nostalgia of Halloween is communal. It binds generations together in a ritual of continuity. It is also artistic. Writers, filmmakers, and musicians have long used Halloween as a lens through which to explore memory and time. The holiday's imagery, the lonely street at dusk, the sound of footsteps on leaves, the distant call of laughter, evoke something timeless and poetic. In Ray Bradbury's The Halloween Tree, a group of children travels through history to learn the origins of the holiday, discovering that it is, above all, about remembrance. In John Carpenter's Halloween, the quiet streets of suburbia become haunted not only by fear, but by the ghost of innocence lost. In every retelling, the season becomes a canvas for reflection, a meditation on what it means to grow older while holding on to wonder. Yet nostalgia is not only about personal memory. It is also cultural, collective. Halloween gathers all of civilization's dreams and fears into one evening, allowing the past to breathe again. The costumes may change, but the stories endure: witches, ghosts, monsters, heroes, all reborn each October like the leaves that return after winter. These archetypes are more than entertainment, they are fragments of humanity's shared mythology, symbols through which we remember ourselves. The witch becomes the wise woman once feared, the ghost becomes the echo of history, the monster becomes the misunderstood outsider. Through them, we revisit the ancient lessons that shaped us. The passing of time gives Halloween its bittersweet edge. Every year, the decorations come down a little sooner, the pumpkins rot a little faster, the air grows colder a little earlier. Yet somehow, this very decay deepens the magic. The fleeting nature of the season, the knowledge that it will be gone by morning, makes it precious. Halloween exists in twilight, not only in light or darkness, but in that in-between place where beauty and sadness coexist. It reminds us that life's most meaningful moments are the ones that cannot last. Even the symbols of the holiday carry this wistful duality. The candle inside the pumpkin burns knowing it will go out. The fallen leaves crunch beneath our feet, their bright colors fading even as we admire them. The costumes, worn once, are folded away. But the memories remain, stored like embers in the mind, ready to glow again when the air turns crisp the following year. In this way, Halloween becomes a ritual of renewal through remembrance. Nostalgia, at its core, is an act of gratitude. To feel longing for the past is to acknowledge that something beautiful once existed. On Halloween night, as we light candles, carve pumpkins, or walk beneath the thinning trees, we participate in that gratitude. We honor not only those who came before us, but the earlier versions of ourselves, the children who once believed, the dreamers who once hoped. The night becomes a quiet conversation between what was and what is, and in that dialogue, we find peace. So when the wind sighs through the empty streets, and the glow of the jack-o'-lantern flickers low, do not think of endings. Think of continuance. Think of all the Octobers that have come before and all those yet to come. Halloween is not a farewell to the light, but a promise that it will return. The season passes, the leaves fall, the fires dim, but memory endures, and in memory, there is always light. And as you drift towards sleep, perhaps with that familiar mixture of calm and wistfulness, imagine standing beneath a harvest moon. The air smells of wood smoke and apple, the world around you wrapped in gold and shadow. In the distance, laughter fades, but the feeling remains, the deep, quiet knowing that the past is never truly gone, only sleeping, waiting for you to remember it. That is the true spirit of Halloween, not a night of fright, but a night of remembrance, not a festival of endings, but a hymn to the endless turning of time. Part 19, October's Children, Art, Storytelling, and the Eternal Imagination. Every season of the human heart finds its voice in art, and for thousands of years, autumn has inspired stories that glow like embers against the chill of encroaching winter. The dying of the year seems to sharpen the mind's eye and loosen the tongue. When the world grows quiet and the veil of daylight thins, imagination steps forward, dressed in the colors of dusk. It is no wonder that Halloween, the night that gathers every echo of wonder, fear, and remembrance, has become the artist's favorite season. It lives halfway between the real and the imagined, where all good stories are born. The first storytellers of October were not writers at all but keepers of the flame. In the old Celtic lands, as Samhain approached, the people gathered by the communal fires to trade tales of spirits and heroes, of gods who walked among mortals and of the thin places where one world touched another. Their words were not mere diversions. They were maps of meaning, guiding listeners through the darkness of the year and the mysteries of life. A good story could warm the heart as surely as the fire could warm the hands. Those ancient voices survive in fragments, folk tales, legends, and whispers woven into the songs of the countryside, but the instinct behind them endures. Every time someone sits in the dim glow of a pumpkin or candle and tells a ghost story, they are joining that unbroken lineage of storytellers. Fear and fascination still mingle in the telling, just as they did centuries ago. The language has changed, the images have evolved, but the intent is the same, to make the unseen visible, to give the heart a place to rest within mystery. As civilization grew and the written word took hold, autumn found new life on the page. Medieval monks recorded hagiographies that blurred miracles and hauntings, and poets compared the fall of leaves to the passing of souls. The romantic writers of the 18th and 19th centuries, Byron, Shelley, Keats, made the melancholy of autumn into a kind of art form, seeing in its decay a sublime beauty. And then, in the late 19th century, the modern Halloween imagination was born. Gothic novels like Dracula and Frankenstein transformed folklore into literature, turning old fears into reflections of human longing. Art gave Halloween a new purpose, not just to entertain, but to explore the edges of being. The ghosts of October ceased to be warnings from beyond and became mirrors instead. The haunted mansion was no longer only a place of terror, it was a metaphor for memory, for the rooms we keep locked inside ourselves. The vampire was no longer a monster alone but a symbol of desire and exile. The witch, once feared, became an emblem of independence and intuition. Every archetype of Halloween became an artist's tool, reshaped by the imagination into something deeply human. Cinema, when it arrived, inherited that mantle. The flickering of a film reel is its own kind of firelight, and audiences huddled together in the dark are not so different from villagers gathered around a flame. The silver screen made the myths of October move and breathe again. From the silent shadows of Nosferatu to the warm nostalgia of Hocus Pocus, the stories of Halloween continue to reinvent themselves, adapting to each generation's heartbeat. Each retelling is a reminder that imagination is itself immortal. The painters and musicians followed. Artists found in autumn's fading light a palette of gold, rust, and shadow that captured the tension between beauty and impermanence. Composers gave the season its soundtracks, the whisper of violins, the slow toll of distant bells, the minor keys that tremble between sorrow and sweetness. Even the humblest folk decorations, paper bats, smiling pumpkins, silhouettes in windows, carry the spark of artistry. Every brushstroke, every note, every carved grin is an act of creation in the face of decay, a small defiance against time. But perhaps the greatest art of Halloween is the one that belongs to the imagination itself. The creativity that blooms each October, children designing costumes, families transforming porches into worlds of wonder, communities spinning stories from shadows, is art in its purest form. It is collective dreaming, where everyone becomes both artist and audience. The smallest child painting a ghost on a paper bag and the most accomplished filmmaker crafting a masterpiece share the same impulse, to turn the intangible into something that can be felt. There is something profoundly democratic about Halloween's imagination. Unlike the fine arts confined to galleries or concert halls, Halloween welcomes everyone to create. You do not need wealth, training, or fame to participate, only the willingness to dream. A carved pumpkin, a homemade costume, a story whispered by flashlight, all are valid expressions of that timeless urge to give form to feeling. The holiday's true genius lies in its inclusivity. It reminds us that imagination belongs to all people, not as a luxury, but as a birthright. That is why the art of Halloween always feels slightly nostalgic. It connects the child and the elder, the storyteller and the listener, the past and the present. Every handmade decoration, every retold ghost story carries traces of earlier hands, earlier voices. The mythology of the season is a tapestry constantly rewoven, each generation adding its thread while keeping the pattern intact. In this way, Halloween becomes more than a holiday, it becomes a living gallery of human creativity. Even as technology reshapes the world, the imagination of October endures. Digital artists paint haunted forests that glow on screens instead of canvases, filmmakers craft virtual nightmares, writers publish ghost stories that travel the globe in seconds. Yet behind every new medium lies the same ancient pulse. The story of Halloween has never truly been about fear, it has always been about expression. It is not the ghosts we crave, but the act of conjuring them. To imagine is to affirm that the unseen matters, that wonder still lives in a rational world. Perhaps that is why Halloween, more than any other celebration, feels timeless. It is not bound to doctrine or nation, it thrives wherever creativity exists. Its art teaches us how to hold contradictions, to laugh at fear, to find beauty in decay, to see mystery not as threat but as promise. It reminds us that the human imagination is itself a kind of eternal October, ever turning, ever renewing, forever poised between darkness and light. And so, when you walk down a street glowing with jack-o'-lanterns or hear a song that makes the heart tremble with both joy and unease, know that you are standing in the gallery of centuries. The artists of Halloween are all around you, the children with paint-streaked hands, the storytellers by the fire, the quiet dreamers who see magic in shadows. Together, they keep alive the great imaginative flame that has burned since the first autumn night humanity looked into the dark and saw possibility. In the end, every ghost story, every carved face, every whispered legend is a love letter to the creative spirit. The art of Halloween does not merely entertain, it sustains. It teaches us to look closely at the fading light and find inspiration there. It tells us that even as the world darkens, imagination remains a candle no wind can extinguish. And if you listen closely, as the night deepens and the leaves drift past the window, you might hear it, the soft, eternal heartbeat of October's children. It is the rhythm of the storyteller's breath, the painter's brush, the child's laughter. It is the sound of humanity dreaming in the dark. Part 20, The Circle of Light, Halloween's Enduring Soul. Every story must end, but some endings are not truly endings at all. They are simply returns, circles drawn so wide that it takes a lifetime, or even an age, to realize we have come home again. So it is with Halloween. It began thousands of years ago as a fire on a hill, a gathering of people standing between the light and the dark, and though the flames have changed their shapes and names, they have never gone out. Every candle that flickers inside a pumpkin, every porch light glowing against the night, every child's laughter rising into the cool October air is a continuation of that same eternal moment. Halloween is not a relic of the past. It is the heartbeat of remembrance, the rhythm that links what we were, what we are, and what we dream to be. As we look back across the long road of history, the Celts and their Samhain fires, the medieval prayers, the Renaissance masquerades, the parades, the horror films, the candy, the costumes, it is easy to see only change. But beneath the surface, the essence has always remained humanity's conversation with the dark. It is a dialogue as old as language, older even than religion. The ancient people feared the night because it was unknowable, yet they honored it because they sensed truth there, a truth that everything living must face shadow to understand light. Halloween, in all its forms, is how we keep that conversation alive. There is tenderness in the tradition. Even in its mischief and laughter, Halloween carries compassion. It allows us to remember the dead without despair, to face fear without surrender, to play with the unknown rather than flee from it. Every generation reinvents the symbols, but the meanings remain stitched together: courage, imagination, community, remembrance. It is a night when we are allowed to be many things at once: child and elder, mortal and myth, fearful and fearless. For children, it is adventure, the world transformed into a playground of mystery. For parents, it is continuity, the joy of seeing old traditions renewed. For artists, it is inspiration. For the weary, it is reprieve. Halloween belongs to all of these, because it is built from the raw materials of human experience: life, death, joy, longing, and hope. It teaches, gently and without sermon, that fear and beauty often walk hand in hand, and that both are necessary to make the world whole. As time marches forward and the modern world grows brighter and faster, one might think there is no place left for a holiday born in darkness. But perhaps that is precisely why it endures. In an age when every question seems answerable and every mystery seems solvable, Halloween reminds us of the importance of wonder. It gives us permission to pause, to turn off the noise, and to feel again the vastness of existence, the chill in the wind, the endlessness of the stars, the flicker of light that can still hold back the dark. It reminds us that mystery is not something to be erased, but cherished. And so each year, the ritual continues. Pumpkins are carved, costumes chosen, doorways lit. The youngest walk the streets in wide-eyed delight, and the oldest watch from porches, smiling softly. The air smells of leaves and sugar, the moon keeps its patient watch, and for a few hours, the whole world seems to breathe together. Every porch light becomes a small sun, every candle a prayer. The ancient and the modern merge seamlessly, the bonfire and the light bulb, the ghost story and the television screen, the chant and the song. It is the same celebration spoken in different languages, the triumph of light through darkness, of connection through separation, of memory through time. When the night is over and the fires burn low, the world grows quiet again. The streets empty, the jack-o'-lanterns dim, and the wind carries away the last traces of laughter. But the feeling remains. It lingers in the silence like the scent of smoke after a flame has gone out. That feeling, warm, wistful, alive, is the soul of Halloween. It is the knowledge that even the smallest light matters, that even the darkest night can be beautiful. In truth, Halloween has never been about fear at all. It has always been about gratitude, the gratitude of being alive in a world where mystery still exists. It reminds us that to live fully is to accept both the fleeting and the eternal, to honor what has passed while embracing what remains. Every October, we return to the circle, to the turning of the year, to the moment between endings and beginnings. And as we light our candles, as we step into the night, we join a procession that stretches back through time, one unbroken line of dreamers and storytellers carrying fire through the dark. So when next you see the glow of a jack-o'-lantern or hear laughter drifting through the crisp October air, pause for a moment. Feel the quiet gravity beneath the joy. You are standing in the middle of a story that began long before you and will continue long after. You are part of the great circle, the eternal heartbeat of Halloween, the conversation between shadow and light that keeps the world awake. And when the last leaf falls and the wind begins its long song of winter, remember, the light you carry from this night will last until the next. For that is Halloween's promise, whispered softly across the centuries: the fire may fade, but it is never lost. And so the story settles, like leaves at dusk. The fires of Samhain, the songs of children, the laughter beneath the harvest moon, all drift together into one gentle hush. Halloween, in every age, has been humanity's way of remembering that darkness is not the enemy of light, but its oldest companion. Thank you for listening, and may the calm of October's night, with its quiet glow and ancient peace, follow you into sleep. Background historian out.